You're recording.
There we go.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second quarter 2021 Conrail Historical Society virtual membership meeting. So I'm going to run through our announcements and some of our society news first. So we'll start with that. Share desktop.
Hey, look at that. You guys can see that?
Let's go flip this.
Good.
Yes.
All right, Brock's giving
There
us
we go.
thumbs up. All right.
All right. Couple of quick things here today. These are our next two events for the year. We were just talking about this as a board about a day or two ago. We are going to do the July meeting virtually. We had talked to Marion Union Station a few weeks ago, and they were kind of on the fence about the whole thing, and having an event in a building like that, and especially with the amount of people we usually get out there, would have been pretty crowded. So
They are doing some events, but we are a larger group than they normally would handle comfortably indoors. So they had said they'd be more than happy to welcome us if we wanted to do it, but they were going to kind of leave it up to us. And I think at this point, it's just not certain enough to be able to make that call.
right. So we are going to do a virtual event in July. We are leaving the possibility of an in-person event open for November at this point. We'll have to kind of keep up to date on things as they change, by state, by municipality, what possibilities we may have in November. So that'll be TBA. So July 17th and November 6th will be our next two events. Next item is our membership.
So as of yesterday, I haven't seen anything come in today. We're at 417 members for 2021, which is right around where we were last year. We're kind of in the same boat. We are seeing some memberships pop back in. The one I put in the other day had not been a member since 2014. So we're seeing some older members coming back, which is awesome. It's very, 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 it speaks highly to the way that the organization has pulled itself back together and what we're doing and what the members see, which is very important. What you're seeing up on your screen is our spread of where our members are located. Obviously a lot in the Northeast, but as we've said in past meetings, probably should be getting out to the Ohio, Indiana, Illinois area, Michigan at some point for some kind of meeting or get together or something to that effect. So once things get safe again, we're going to look at trying to do some more out there as well.
Yep. And you can see too, we've got a pretty heavy concentration in New England and in New Jersey as well that we don't typically hit with events. So we may be doing some stuff in that area as well.
Connecticut, New Hampshire. Yeah, there's areas. Absolutely.
Next item is our ongoing Boxcar Museum project. I did not see Jim in here, but really not much to report since our last meeting a month and a half ago. We are still waiting to get the boxcar moved. That's really the next step in the process, getting the boxcar moved to its location in Shippensburg.
The field has to dry out sufficiently that the truck is not going to tear it up, bringing the boxcar in.
Yeah, I mean, even an empty boxcar is still a heavy piece of steel, so it needs to get there safely without destroying the field and a truck sinking into the field. So that's really the next step, and the rest of our timeline is kind of dependent upon when that actually happens. So we'll keep everybody posted. Next. So the archives, we have gotten some good donations in for the archives recently. Stuff that we will probably be putting on display in the museum. We've also gotten a couple of photo collections donated to us by individuals and also by other historical societies. The Anthracite Railroad Historical Society has given us a pretty good library of Conrail stuff recently, both slides and black and white negatives. Those are here. I should start getting them scanned and sorted out soon, but they came in recently. The other thing that's come in for our archives is a unsolicited donation from Conrail, Shared Assets, for $5,000 towards our preservation efforts for our archives, which will be very good. That'll help us get kind of situated with the museum's new archives portion starting once we get that constructed towards the end of this year. So we'd already done a fundraiser towards the end of last year for about $13,000 and change that came in that will buy us computers, some other workstations, a variety of scanners, including a large format scanner that we can use and blueprints and other large, dispatcher sheets. We have a large selection of. So this will help us get some extra shelving, some storage boxes, and stuff like that we can use going forward for the archives. So we have I think it's $18,000 now, $18,800 or something like that earmarked for the archives in our treasury.
Separate from the grants for the boxcar restoration itself.
Correct. That's an addition to the $134,000 we already have earmarked towards the boxcar. So we do a really good job of outfitting the archives
with more than enough operating budget left over.
Correct. Next item is the shop. Really quick, we have been staying up to date on the various Conrail books that have been released. Everything recent is available in the shop. We have also been restocking most of the older Morning Sun titles that are still available. So everything is there. We also do still have a couple of the Atlas HO scale bicentennial GB38s available if anyone wants any of them. And also all of our recent quarterlies are available in the shop as well, if you miss any of those or missed a membership here or anything like that.
We've been trying to ship things out within a couple days of orders. So Postal Service has gotten slower again. Just for anybody that's put orders in, we're being told by our local post office that things are slowing down again. They're having problems with stuff. So if you put an order in and in a week you don't see it, just send us an email. Rudy and I are trying very diligently to keep up on responding to the emails and making sure everybody knows where their products are.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little more when I get to publications here in a minute with the quarterly shipping. So, equipment report. Obviously, this was our big news that went out via email about what week or 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. This went out via email that we had acquired a FlexiFlow hopper donated to us by CSX that we subsequently turned around and donated to the Danbury Railway Museum. We coordinated all of the shipping and logistics for this car to get it to Danbury. And our donation agreement with Danbury specifies the car will be repainted and maintained in Conrail paint. This is the first FlexiFlow in preservation and probably one of very few, if not the only one surviving. So it was definitely a neat find for us to be able to preserve this car and get it to a good home. We also have the first right of refusal on the car. If Danbury ever decides they would like to dispose of it from their collection, we would be able to get it back from them for free. So the big news that really I haven't even had a chance to send an email out about it yet because it just happened. I think it was Thursday night or Friday. Is we just got a Conrail speeder donated to us. This is a fully operational Fairmont M9G. It's originally a New York Central car that was purchased by a gentleman named Phil Hines from Conrail directly in 1984. It was the yard sign in Sharonville, Ohio, and that's the top left picture is the car on a little piece of track in the yard in Sharonville. That was what you saw when you drove into the yard. So he purchased it from Conrail. He got it operational. The car is currently at his house in Michigan. And we were making arrangements to go pick it up probably in mid-July. One of our members is going to go do that for us. And we'll bring that back east. And it's probably going to go to...
I think in the interim, it's probably going to come here.
Either come here or go to John's house, one of our director's house. Until we figure out what we're doing with it. But it is operational. It's got a turntable underneath it so it can be... I don't know,
or
hydraulic turntable, I think. Underneath it so it can be turned around and used for speeder trips or just puts it around a piece of track somewhere. So we also are getting a trailer with the speeder. So it will be portable. So
we can bring it to events and things like that. It does look like it's got if not the original Fairmont engine, it's got the correct Fairmont engine for the reproduction. It's this kind of speeder is going to be very easy to run. It'll be great. Members will get a kick out of it. It's not going to be hard to operate. It's almost nothing to maintain. So I think it's a good donation.
Yep, and it's something we can bring to, say Springfield for display or something like that. It's something small enough we can use for a large train show like that. So
it's tiny. We could roll it right in there and just sit it next to the table.
Yeah, so it'll be a neat piece for us to have for outreach, as well as for something we can kind of use for events and stuff like that. So we're still developing a plan exactly what we want to do with it, and that's kind of why we have till July to move it. But we did get the donation letter signed, so this is actually our car now.
It is so cool.
Yeah,
it's in great shape. I'm you can see me geeking out here. I'm a speeder girl, so I'm excited.
Completely rebuilt, ground up in like 2008.
Yep.
And really has been basically sidelined since about 2014, as the owner got older and wasn't able to keep running it all the time. So it's in about as new condition as you're going to get for a car that was built in 1947.
Yep.
Nice.
So.
Well, I'll totally open my wallet to pay for rides. That'll be so much fun. That's just like so cool.
I'll teach you how to run it.
Cool.
Yeah. So real quick, I'll run through the rest of our kind of equipment and stuff we've been involved with. 8905 is still floating around at Baltimore. That's still their pride and joy shop engine. It's still getting used fairly regularly. You may have seen some recent photos of it moving the B&O EA around as they were moving in out of the back shop and roundhouse display areas. So it is getting some public use, and it is they absolutely love it. So yeah, Larry Young is here. There we go. Okay, I guess he caught his train. 2165 is still on the A&A. I have to reach out to Mike and find out what their plans are for the summer. I'm not 100% sure. I don't think they've announced anything major yet. But assuming they are running this year, this car will be used on their operations. The 22130 is going to be coming out of hibernation sometime soon up on the Sturbridge line. It's currently stored in Hawley, among a bunch of other equipment that needs to get kind of split up and moved around sometime soon. So we'll be coordinating with the Sturbridge line to get that dug out and start getting them to work on it for us as part of their agreement to have the car there. They were going to restore it and pay themselves back out of the ticket revenues from using the car in excursion service. So
none out of pocket for us.
Nothing out of pocket for us. So far we have exactly $0 invested in this car. Actually, that may not be entirely true because I think we paid for the AEI tax.
No,
the ACI labels.
Oh, the ACI labels.
That Brock had.
Yeah, it's because the AEI tags.
That's true. We
were donated.
Tags were donated to us too. That's right. And our Triple Crown trailer is still sitting up in Weatherly in storage at the moment. We did renew the registration on that this year, so it is still surprisingly valid to move over the road. I probably needs a little bit of brake work, but and probably some tires, but luckily it is stored at an automotive shop that has the capacity to do this for us when we do want to move the trailer out of there. I'm sorry. So that we're looking for a home for that. And we may actually have one later in the year where this can be displayed at a railroad museum. So we'll keep everybody appraised of that. Next on the list is the quarterly. I know there were some delays shipping the winter quarterly. I think everybody should have it by now. If you don't, let us know. We got some extras because there are going to be some problems.
The mail system had problems.
So yeah, there were some issues getting that out. We're seeing that like a month later than other people.
Yeah, Doug, your brother emailed me because he didn't see it. We ended up shipping another one out. So yeah, there were some problems.
So if you do not have your winter quarterly yet, you should have gotten it about a month and a half ago. If you don't have it yet, let us know. We'll get you a new one. This is the spring issue, which kind of coincidentally ended up being about FlexiFlows. We were actually planning on doing a FlexiFlow article in the winter and had the whole thing laid out and ready to go. And then the FlexiFlow donation happened. And we decided to put this entire issue off until spring so we can make it coincide with the announcement of the car. So I had to throw together the whole winter issue pretty quickly to get the SD1500 stuff out the door.
Hey, Rudy, if that's the case, do
talking
you think
about-
you want to do an article on SD40-2s?
Yeah, I'll start doing SD80 Mac articles in every issue.
There we go. It's like, put it out to the universe and it'll happen.
Yeah. So yeah, so this is our spring issue. It is at the printer right now. There was a little bit of a delay there because our printer actually has been bought out by a new printer, which is Mount Royal Printing and Communications. They are transferring over most of the people we worked with at Spectrum, who in turn were transferred over from Kutztown when they were bought out a couple years ago. The pricing should be the same. We shouldn't see any difference in the service level provided. But that took effect, I think, last Monday. So yeah, the spring quarterly should be going out any day now to our members.
Again, give it a couple weeks. If you don't see it in 2 or 3
Yeah.
weeks, let us know.
Yeah, I think they were planning on trying to ship it sometime next week. So we'll see when it actually goes out and when people get it. And again, we ordered some extras in case anything happens. If you don't get yours, whenever, once we know everybody's getting theirs, and if yours hasn't shown up yet, let us know and we'll try to get you an extra copy. So one last bit of news here. So I've been president now for a couple of years. I don't remember when I actually started being president because there was some convoluted people taking over things at that time. So I have made the decision that I will be stepping down from the presidency effective at the end of June of this year. Actually, that decision was probably made a couple months ago, realistically. And the board talked about it, and we have decided that Brock will be taking over, whether he likes it or not.
I see Rob clapping.
Yeah. Effective on the beginning of July, then that date's kind of flexible.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is that that decision has been made well early enough that we've already started a lot of the transition stuff. So for everybody, who's just a member, it really shouldn't make any major impact as far as, leadership of the organization, because we've already been making that transition happen for the past couple months and no one has complained yet. So speaking of Brock and one of our members, Wes Reminder, are both working on a book currently. Oh, yeah, I guess I'm not going anywhere. I'll still be a director and I'll still be running the quarterly. You'll still see my name involved in the archives and stuff. My column in the upcoming spring quarterly we just talked about, we'll discuss a little bit more about the transition and, what I'm going to be doing going forward and what Brock's taking over and stuff. But yeah, I still have 2.5 years left of my board term, so you can still see my face around. But yeah, so Brock and Wes are working on a book currently that they're going to give an update on.
Yeah, just to quick wrap up there. Rudy's not going anywhere. We're not going to let him go anywhere. This transition probably started over a year ago when we started talking about it. So Rudy really just came to me for some suggestions, and with my experience with nonprofits and railroads and so forth. And the more we talked, the more we kind of figured out the route that you see in front of you, and that the timing was right. So I can't even begin to say how excited I am. The organization is probably in the best place it has been in its entirety from day one. So we're going to hit the ground running and we're going to keep moving. We're going to notch it out. So no slowing down.
Brock is well qualified to say where the organization was on day one, because you're what, member 9?
Yep, member number 9, and I was on the board pretty much right away because there was nobody else on the board at that point.
There was nobody else there.
So
yeah, so yep, it's believe me, it's a joy of mine to be able to lead this, and And one of the reasons we waited until July to make this transition official was because of the project that Wes and I are working on. We started pre-sales 3 weeks ago, going extremely, extremely well. I want to make a couple points here and talk a little bit about the book. It's $80. I get that may be high for some people, but looking at railroad books, they're typically about $40 for each 100 pages. So if we went with that algorithm, this should be a $160 book. But we didn't want to do that. We wanted to make this as easy as possible for people to obtain and get in their hands. Wes and I have been working on this for over 15 years each. And I want to talk a little bit quickly about the process and how we did it. Wes primarily wrote probably 90% of the book. And then what I did is I came around and went through what he had written with my research, because we didn't want to throw all our research into a bin and kind of just see where it's at. We wanted to have checks and balances. We wanted to make sure that the information was correct. So, Wes ended up writing most of this while I worked on research, trying to find mysteries of finding people, some holes we had in the story, artifacts, pictures, you name it. So we both stayed very busy. We've been doing lots of interviews just recently. Jim Hagan, Ron Conway, Larry DeYoung, Doug Watts, the list goes on and on and on, of some amazing people that steered Conrail. So one of the things, though, that I don't know that Wes and I really realized that this book would open up. It's almost like a Pandora's box. The geometry train has really opened up a Pandora's box for us into the research and the laboratory side of things for Conrail. And fortunately, or unfortunately, that's not something that got a lot of attention ever. And those stories were never really told. And I'm absolutely thrilled that this book is going to be able to do that. Stories on hot box detector simulators, locomotive lubrication, locomotive fuel efficiency, all kinds of things like that the cars, 21, 22, 20, all these cars helped figure that information out. And it's a group of people that worked very hard for Conrail behind the scenes, and you never heard about the things they were doing. And I know Wes and I are really, really happy to finally give them their due. So please share, the link as much as you can. We're trying to make this a one-time, run, that we're not printing more books. So, please go ahead and pre-order. The pre-order is going to be up for a little bit. We understand if you need to save money a little bit for the $80, but at 400 pages, I can guarantee you that you're going to be blown away by this book. Wes, you can jump in. I don't know if you've got, much you want to say about it.
Yeah, no, I'm working on it as we speak. I'm in Photoshop right now, cleaning up photos for it. I like I said before, it's amazing. Every time Brock and I have said, yeah, we're pretty much done with the copy, we're good, somebody else pops up that's got an amazing story that we're trying to cram in. So we're just really thrilled with all the people that are participating and helping us and giving us research and materials, and it's been awesome. And photos, like I'm editing right now, photo collections from people. So looking forward to it. And yeah, it's been a really great project, and I think you'll probably like the results if you have any interest in special equipment at all. So.
And I can't thank Wes enough for doing the photo editing.
Yes.
For what?
For doing the photo editing.
Oh yeah, I'm doing it right now. Yeah.
That is the part that usually bogs me down doing books. So
Yeah.
yeah.
We're doing well on time.
We're doing pretty good on time. I breezed through the announcements faster than I expected to.
Yeah. Larry's ready.
So I don't know if anyone else has anything else they want to
Yeah.
bring up as news items,
I
or
was just gonna say that. Do we have like when we do that for the good of the club thing for the MTA? Do we have like any members that want to throw anything in there?
Well, I wanted to throw out that if anyone has any interest in signaling in general, and specifically a lot of great Conrail model shots, Dave
Mhm.
Abley's book that just came out from Kalmbach is fantastic. And that if you love the pit or the Chicago line, if you love former New York Central stuff, you're gonna love it. Even if you don't plan on building signals, it's worth it just for the pictures.
Cool.
I see Jose Alves just jumped in here. He's the president of the Danbury Railway Museum, and
Where the flexi flow just
where the
went to.
flexi flow just went to.
Mhm.
And I don't know if he wants to say anything about that before we continue.
Oh, also, you want to talk about Alec?
You want to talk about what?
Alex Moore.
He haven't made that decision yet. I don't think he's made that decision yet.
True.
So we may want to wait on that.
I guess Jose doesn't want to talk. Okay.
Hey, Rudy. Hey, Rudy.
Yeah.
John here. Question about the museum. About
Sure.
roughly, what does the timeline look like once we get the boxcar in place? What does the timeline look like between that point and opening?
So the last estimate we had for that was the exterior of the car would be done within about 2 months of it getting placed. The interior kind of depended on when that was done, because they weren't going to start working on the interior until the exterior was at least, watertight. They're not going to start putting
Sure.
mold to be a watertight exterior.
Mhm.
So that kind of depended a little bit on when the car was placed and when when they were able to start working on the interior, and how much of that could be done, based on the weather. If they had to do the HVAC stuff, that probably wasn't going to happen in the winter. So it depended on exactly when the exterior got done. I think we figured on 6 months roughly of interior work to be done. But that depended a little bit on what time frame that was. Assuming that the boxcar was moved today, we could probably have it done by roughly the end of the year. But if the boxcar isn't moved till say July, we're probably looking at spring of next year before it's done.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the rough plan. I mean, we had originally planned on the car getting moved in the fall, and then we had a weird fall weather-wise, and there was never a dry day to do it.
And a hard enough freeze to do it.
Right, and then we went straight from fall to 3 feet of snow on the ground for the entirety of winter.
Right.
We couldn't do it then either.
Yep.
So, that's one of the kind of prices we pay for getting the discount rate for moving the thing. I mean, we're getting charged basically cost to move the car, which is a significant discount from what it would usually cost to do this kind of stuff.
It's special.
And the Dave's Truck Repair
Mhm.
has done a whole lot of specialized work, including building a completely from scratch dolly on which to move the car. So
Thank you.
we're going to take what we can get, and if it takes
Sure.
a little extra time, it takes a little extra time.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Cool. Okay. Thanks.
Well, Larry's ready. You might as well
yeah,
go.
Larry, if you are, so you logged in after your M-Track extravaganza there. If you would
No,
like,
it didn't happen.
Oh, no?
Oh,
No, it hasn't passed yet.
oh, geez.
They're running quite late. I suspect it may have to do with putting the extra power on the train, because it initially showed it right on time, and I would have been on here at 10 after 1. My wife's over at the station with my camera right now.
Oh,
I was going to OS it to Doug when I when I heard it go by.
aw.
Let me.
Yeah.
So Carolyn, am I ready to share screen here?
You are
You
ready.
should be.
Go for it.
Okay, here we go. And slideshow.
There we
Perfect.
are.
So this is going to be informal and opinionated. And Carolyn, when the time comes, use the hook on me, because there's more here than I can possibly do in 45 minutes. So,
Well, you got about 50 minutes now, so we give
okay,
you
well, that helps.
no problem. Go for it.
but as Doug and John know, I can talk. So so this is all right. Now, if I can get the darn slide to change. Why are we not seeing the slide changing? Okay, here we go. I guess it's not working in PowerPoint. I have to bring up this darn thing here. There, okay. So we're going from here. Actually, that's a little before my days at Conrail to this. And Doug was there when I took this one. This was our last photo outing on an independent Conrail before they split. And that's at South Fork. So what I did at Conrail were a number of things. I started in the marketing department as a service analyst, which was an attempt on the part of the newly rearranged marketing department to bring some sanity to what marketing wanted to do, because a lot of the marketing people did not have any rail experience, and they didn't know, for example, when two lines crossed on the map, that didn't mean you could take a right turn at that point. Sometimes, as we all know, there are bridges involved and you can't do that. So our job was to translate things. Here I am working on that job. Let me go back here for a minute because I wanted to talk about these. Then I went to an overall department, marketing department-wide service development job where we did costing of unit trains primarily. From that, based on a previous job I'd had before Conrail, I applied for and got a job in the government affairs department representing Conrail before the state governments in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. And that was a remarkable opportunity because I didn't know it when I took that job in 1983, but in 1985 and 86, we were going to be subject to the attempt by the federal government to sell its 85% interest in Conrail to Norfolk Southern. And Stanley Crane would get his back up about that proposition and try to fight it successfully. And I was intimately involved in that from having this job, sometimes actually having the opportunity to travel with Stanley Crane and talk to him in an unencumbered way as we were sitting next to each other on an airplane. So it was a marvelous job for me personally, for somebody who has the interest in the industry that I do, and for someone who was essentially a very middle management person to have this access to the CEO. Then I was in industrial development, and after that I was in short line marketing. Will you forgive me for a minute? I'm going to have to, the doorbell's ringing and I have to go do it. I have to take care of it. I'll be right back.
In the meantime.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm back.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that. I knew that would happen. My wife's at the station taking train pictures, and a guy shows up with a case of wine on a truck, and he has to have a signature. So,
Oh, that's important.
okay, next. Okay, this is Henry Posner. Many of you have heard of Henry. He's been in the rail fan headlines lately as the chairman of the East Broad Top Foundation. And he's also the head of Railroad Development Corporation in Pittsburgh. He, which owns the Iowa Interstate Railroad. Henry, when I first met him, was a train master at Bronx, at Oak Point Yard in the Bronx. And here he is flashing his Olympus XA camera at me because I was aiming mine at him. This is what I took many of these slides with. So, and I took this picture day before yesterday. I still have the camera. It still works as far as I know. And you can tell from looking at it that it's a little beat up because it rode around in my briefcase for 16 years at Conrail. Okay, so let's get on with the story. Of course, we all know where Conrail came from. There are a few things that we've forgotten, like that Ann Arbor was supposed to be part of it. Didn't happen because the state of Michigan bought it. CNJ, LNHR, Lehigh Valley, complete with air pollution. Penn Central, of course, the elephant that was obviously present in the room and everybody knew it. The Reading Company, a local favorite around here, and Erie Lackawanna, more or less at the last minute because it was intended to go to the Chessie system, and the EL unions squelched that decision to their ultimate regret. Also, in the process, Conrail picked up some short lines that were jointly owned by the components of Conrail, such as Buffalo Creek, Raritan River, and later the Monongahela, because they had to buy out the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie. So we started out, oh, I can OS train 43, it just went by. Okay. We started out with CEO Ed Jordan and President Dick Spence. Jordan came from the insurance industry. Spence came from Southern Pacific. They didn't get along well. Spence didn't fit in with the existing culture from Penn Central. But as Stanley Crane told me when I was on one of those airplane flights, if Jordan hadn't set the table for him through recognizing the real problem Conrail had and getting both the Staggers Act and the Northeast Rail Services Act passed, Crane couldn't have accomplished anything that he did. So we should not diminish the role of Ed Jordan, who's the reddish-haired guy on the right. That's Dick Spence on the left. And I do not have any idea why they took a PR photo with a broken lens on a door signal in the foreground. I recall these ads coming out. I actually have a personal copy of one in a frame in the attic. And CRHS is welcome to have it at some point for the museum or whatever. This was the first Conrail logo. Some people thought it was this, and here it's being expressed by union shop forces, because this is in a Conrail facility, and they made a point of walking the visitors around past this. So it was not an accident. It's simply a stencil for use on freight cars, but they hung it up in the window for us all to see. There were some missteps. I think this one's remarkably funny because they came out with the can do button. And then somebody pointed out, not only is that in Chessie system blue and gold, but it spells C and O. So the company rescinded the buttons and everybody was supposed to turn them in. I didn't get there in time for this episode. It happened before I was there. I arrived in 1978. But one day I got a new desk and I pulled out the center top drawer, and it wasn't a new to the company desk. It was somebody else's desk that I now had. Pulled out the drawer and it was rattling, and I pulled it all the way out, and son of a gun, there was one of those buttons. So I have one. We spent time looking for trains. It wasn't quite this bad, but I thought this illustrated the point. It was kind of like the split, right after the split, when Norfolk Southern couldn't find anything. But we also invested in ties, rail, paint, and a lot of other things. But Washington had this expectation that within one congressional cycle of 2 years, throwing $5 billion at Conrail was going to turn the corner. Without having applied any common sense whatsoever to it. When you've got decrepit facilities and basically a fixed available force of people to work on it, you can't turn it around in 2 years. And Conrail continued to struggle. When I joined Conrail in 1978, we were losing $1 million a day. That wasn't supposed to have been happening by then, and Congress was upset and wanted to do something about it. Oh, here's a mainline track. I mean, look, there's a chip out of the rail at the joint. It's end battered. You can't really see it here, but the spikes are pulling out. And it was 50-mile-an-hour railroad before Conrail. It was not afterwards. And you'll notice that there are rails laid out here because this picture was taken after Conrail, but the job hadn't been done yet. It couldn't be. This track isn't as bad as it looks. It was actually a 60-mile-an-hour track. This is on the former New York Central in Erie, Pennsylvania. But there were things like this. Now, you may say, well, what's going on here? Clearly, there are freight cars there, and they haul what are called mids or middlings from grain milling, and they're used as feed ingredients for animals. But these 3 old PRR gondolas and flat cars here in the foreground are equipped with traction couplers, so they can go around an extreme curve, because from the track they are on, they must go into the building in the background perpendicular to the building. If you are familiar with switch numbers, I will tell you something that will surprise you. This is a number 2.5 switch that was in regular service on Conrail. 2.5. And this back here in the background, that's one of those cars for reaching in there, because no locomotive was capable of going around that curve and coupling to a car. We had sophisticated equipment for the 1940s. We had sophisticated interactive mapping systems for the 1940s. We had sophisticated crossing protection for the 1920s, complete with 4 supervisors and 1 guy doing the work. This is actually at South Amboy, New Jersey, and those 4 guys are rail fans, but that's beside the point. We had commuter service, and that was a huge part of the problem that Conrail had. Much more so, I think, than even Conrail realized at startup. This was a trivial one. This was the 1 daily round trip between Cleveland and Youngstown, which this is its last run, and it had 3 cars on it only because rail fans were riding it that day. It had gone from 4 cars when Erie Lackawanna was headquartered in Cleveland to 1 car after the headquarters closed, which tells you how many of the passengers were deadheads riding on passes and why it was uneconomic to run. We were building track. I wasn't there yet. This is 1976. Leasing locomotives from anybody that had them, and trying to move ahead as fast as possible. But we had stuff that was non-standard. Alco had been out of business for 8 years. And then a blizzard hit. This is around Buffalo. This is Cincinnati, which had not had a snowstorm of this amount in 40 years. This is what happened in Cincinnati, just as in the normal course of things. But there were good things too. Buckeye Yard, now gone essentially, but Buckeye had a modern engine terminal. Buckeye was a modern hump yard in 1976. Modern equipment for the day. You look at this today and you say, oh, that's old. Yeah, but it wasn't then. There was a lot of work being done. Sperry was out patrolling the track everywhere. As you can see in the foreground here, new ties around the battered joints, new rail, lots of surfacing, working as fast as we could to recover from the decline. I always joke that we threw silver paint at anything that was vertical. So you didn't want to stand still. The shops were busy rehabilitating locomotives, mostly not Alcos, although I see one in the background there. And we bought new locomotives. This was the first one we got. It had been built for the purple and white auto train, Eugene Garfield's operation to Florida, and they weren't delivered by GE, and Conrail bought them. And I believe they were the only 4 locomotives on the Conrail roster that had the nose headlights on them. And these guys were pressed into service right away. And then a huge purchase of SD40-2s, GP40-2s, and smaller numbers of GE locomotives were purchased. We experimented with the EMD electrics on the corridor, but because of the influence of Amtrak as owner of the corridor, they didn't last very long because electrification was not an answer for Conrail without extending it to Pittsburgh. And very careful consultant studies that were done showed that that extending Conrail to Pittsburgh, electrification to Pittsburgh on Conrail was not economic under the economics of energy at the time. We were heavily involved in intermodal, and intermodal in those days was mostly trailer on flat car. And as I said, we had to identify the problem in the early strategic planning department, and Ed Jordan led the charge. Leo Mullen, who became CEO of Delta Airlines later, was a very young vice president of strategic planning and had a charge of a bunch of fresh, high-profile MBAs who studied Conrail and determined that as long as we were heavily regulated, we couldn't move forward and accomplish what Conrail had, or what Congress had set as our mission. The problem with the Jordan era, and I observed this firsthand, was that we were beset with consultants. One of my projects when I was a service analyst was to evaluate moves of unit grain trains from various source elevators to various export destinations. And I made my recommendation in early 1979. And in 1983, when I'd moved on to the government affairs department, my former boss came and said, "Remember that study you did?" Yeah. Well, 3 consultants have looked at it and they all agree with your decision and they recommended that we do it. But the company that asked for it said they've moved on and they don't care anymore. Well, no kidding. You want a marketing decision in 4 years. That was the consultant problem. When Crane got there, the consultants went away. Stu Reed replaced Dick Spence, Stanley Crane replaced Ed Jordan, and the whole notion of Conrail changed, and decision-making became paramount. We didn't sit around dithering or consulting. The consultants were terminated, and Conrail began leading the industry into a new era. Here are Stu Reed and Stanley Crane. I would be the first to sign up for the L. Stanley Crane fan club. I would not sign up for the Stu Reed fan club. His distinctions at Conrail, as far as I am concerned, is that he looked like Stuart Saunders from the PRR, and he sat in the same office. He was, to my estimation, not a notable leader. Here is top management. Not all of them. The marketing people are missing, but from the left we have Bob Swert in labor relations, Bill Brown and Bob Platt from finance, Dick Garbett from public affairs, Stanley Crane with his hand up there, Stu Reed, John Rowe from the law department, who went on to be the CEO of Exelon, Cliff Owens with his hand on his chin there, chief of engineering, Dick Hasselman the head of operations, senior vice president, one of the most brilliant railroaders I ever met. And the guy in the back there was Bill Newman, who was my boss. As it says here, I didn't take this picture. This was from a file, a Conrail file photograph. Here's Dick Hasselman at Bob Downing's retirement in Selkirk. That's Mrs. Downing there with the flower. We're out analyzing things. You have to understand Stanley Crane was a civil engineer. He had worked for the PRR. And so he knew some things up here. And track was his number one focus. He used to say drainage, drainage, drainage. So we were out, and it's clear there was a drainage problem here. In this case, it was caused by beavers. It was a beaver dam. But attention to track brought much better looking things to Conrail. Now, you look at the track here, you look at the power, everything looks better than it did. We began to really accomplish things. We even had a slogan about it. So we were profitable. We became profitable by 1983. The question was, is Conrail really successful? There were doubters, but we can look at the data, and these are just slides that I lifted from the presentation we used to do when we were out pounding the turf, trying to resist the government's attempt to sell us to Norfolk Southern. So these end in 1984. The trends continued. So this is just a sense of how well Conrail was doing. Locomotives out of service down by half, and it continued. Train hours held for power from a basis of 177, not even the beginning, but 1977, down to 2.0 in 84. Productivity gains, and this continued greatly. We all know the route story. I'm not going to dwell on this. So Drew Lewis, initially, the guy who became CEO of Union Pacific and moved them to Bethlehem, was President Reagan's initial transportation secretary, and he was succeeded by Elizabeth Dole, who effectively didn't know much about transportation. So she relied on her subordinates, all of whom were kind of gun shy. So they passed the Northeast Rail Services Act, Congress did, and it established certain benchmarks that Conrail had to achieve and to avoid either being sectioned off and auctioned off in pieces or being sold as an entity to somebody else. Well, we passed the grade for not being sectioned off and auctioned off, but the bureaucrats decided that it was too risky to have Conrail become an independent entity, so they were going to sell us to Norfolk Southern. Now, I have to confess that the map of a combined Norfolk Southern and Conrail was a pretty good one, but Conrail, we all said, and I believe it to this day, deserved the right to be an independent company. And a key to that was getting rid of the commuter operations. There was a big dispute that most people don't remember anymore, but Conrail claimed that it was subsidizing commuter operations along the Northeast to the tune of about $300 million a year. That's a substantial portion of that $1 million a day I was talking about. The commuter authorities said we were subsidizing our freight profits out of their revenues and that we should quit doing that. They couldn't present a valid basis for their claim. We could. And finally, in the Northeast Rail Services Act, it said that on January 1st, 1983, all the commuter operations were to become the responsibility of the respective authorities, New Jersey Transit, MARC, MBTA, et cetera. And lo and behold, at the end of 1983, Conrail made $300 million. I think we had the better numbers. Just an opinion. We also had a lot of, this is an unfair portrayal because it's not really what I claim it is, but we had a lot of light density branch lines that needed to be trimmed, and the Northeast Rail Services Act provided for an accelerated process of doing that, either through abandonment or sale. And Conrail was quite aggressive at pursuing that. It was stressing to the then that Conrail was successful, and we succeeded on the basis of lots of money from the federal government based on labor management cooperation. And I think labor management cooperation came about because of the threat of dismembering Conrail, cost reductions and operating efficiencies, and competitive actions made possible by deregulation. Key in cost reductions and operating efficiencies was turning the commuter operation over to the SEPTAs and Metro Norths of the world. On March 17th, 1987, there was a new listing on the New York Stock Exchange, and Mr. Crane was a very happy man that day. He envisioned staying on for a long time thereafter, but he was already 75 years old. And I'm pretty close to knowing what being 75 years old feels like. He had more energy than I do, but the board decided that his time had come and began planning for his succession. Meanwhile, we were out doing the business that a profitable New York Stock Exchange listed company would do, including presenting our safety message on the square at the Capitol in New York State in Albany, upgrading the piers in Philadelphia, selling off the Edgewater branch in New Jersey. That's New Jersey Governor Tom Kean and Secretary of Transportation Hazel Frank Gluck at the podium up there, and getting our slogan locomotive out there along the crushed trap rock ballast and welded rail, mostly welded rail, of the railroad. As you can see, the track along the PRR main was much better. MG Tower was still there, but it's not anymore. But we had to contend with competition. We had to contend with operations in urban environments. And we had to contend with the decline of the steel industry. When I joined Conrail in '78, when Conrail started, Bethlehem Steel was Conrail's largest single customer. When Conrail disappeared into Norfolk Southern and CSX in 1999, Bethlehem Steel didn't exist. This is Republic Steel, which also didn't exist by then. And you can see, this is in Youngstown. You can see just how antiquated it was. And this is now not a brownfield site, you've heard the term. This is now a greenfield site. There is no evidence whatsoever that there ever was an integrated steel mill seen from the Center Street Bridge in Youngstown. It's gone. We had maintenance issues. We had high bridges. This one was pretty good, actually, but the bridges on the low grade from Royalton to Parksburg here in eastern Pennsylvania, for example, were the driving force behind why the ANS was abandoned and we began routing the freight to Philadelphia and the Northeast over the Reading. There were other matters as well, but that was a significant factor. We had lots of yards, some of them still not in great condition. So Stanley Crane was succeeded by Dick Sanborn. Conrail was an independent company. Dick Sanborn succeeded in, I believe it was 1989 in January. And he was a rail fan, and he liked passenger equipment as well as freight equipment. Had his office car upgraded to this standard. During his term, we acquired car 55. But unfortunately, although Mr. Sanborn had a good working relationship with labor when he was president, before he became CEO, he was CEO for only 6 weeks when he died at age 52. The story has it, I don't know this on a first-hand basis, but it sounds true, that he didn't like the effects of his high blood pressure medication, so he quit taking it. What I do know is he had a massive heart attack and died suddenly. It was a Sunday morning in February, and I got a call from our sales office in Chicago. That's how you learn things on the railroad. You know, things go the long way. That Sanborn had died. Meanwhile, we had invested in our own retail intermodal operation. We were fully engaged in the automotive business. This is Honda at Marysville, Ohio. We had repurposed the iron ore pier in South Philadelphia as a fertilizer pier. And we continued to invest in the company. Sanborn dying suddenly left us kind of flat-footed. We didn't know where we were going to go, and the board hadn't planned for a successor to Sanborn for 6 weeks after he took office. So temporarily, Stanley Hillman, who was on the board and had been the trustee of the Milwaukee Road in bankruptcy, served as acting CEO while we did a nationwide search. And Jim Hagan, who had been senior vice president of marketing and sales, came back to Conrail as the new CEO. This is Jim Hagan in his marketing days. I've had people say, no CEO can be a CEO and not be an SOB. That is demonstrably not true, and here is the proof, because this is one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. Jim Hagan is just a wonderful gentleman. He also has a wonderful knack of being able to remember who you are and things about you years after he's met you. Unfortunately, he was not a real good judge of people, and some of the people he moved into top positions were not as good as the people that preceded them. But nevertheless, we set out on some new ventures. We put the trough train in service between South Jersey and North, carrying sand to where there are rocks and carrying rocks to where there's sand. We did more run-through business with other railroads. CSX was particularly easy to do business with since Jim Hagan had come back to Conrail from CSX. We initiated the Conrail quality process, which for the most part, I think was entirely sincere and well done. It was also kind of a buzzword of the time, and unfortunately didn't always go as planned. Now here's a unit train of snow, and it's being pulled by 3 units fresh out of Juniata shop. And by the time the train got to Allentown, all 3 units were dead, and it had to be towed in by the hump set from Allentown Yard. That's actually not snow, it's a coal train. But anyhow, once in a while, things didn't go right. This is the local switcher at Hershey Chocolate, getting boxcar load of cocoa beans and probably sugar in the covered hopper car. Things look better in Conway Yard than they had before. We were investing in new power. We invested in Triple Crown, where we pulled a nice long train of Triple Crown units with a single GP40-2. You'll see why I emphasize that point in a little bit. Here's Triple Crown in action. We saw new customers such as JB Hunt, not our initiative really, that happened because of the Santa Fe, but we were a large interline customer with Santa Fe, and JB Hunt became a Conrail customer as well. We handled trucking for retail truckers on intermodal cars, and we expanded clearances on the route across Pennsylvania. And I have to make a personal comment here because there are many people who want to take credit for the Pennsylvania clearance project. But I was there when the Pennsylvania clearance project was initiated, and there were only 2 people in the room. I was one of them, and John Waters, who was the head of the Rail Freight Bureau at PennDOT, was the other one. And we started the Pennsylvania clearance project, and there is anybody who wants to say otherwise is going to have to fight us because we know what happened. And I said that this has my opinion in it. That was not my opinion. That was fact. After Hagen, Dave Levan, who was one of Hagen's proteges and had been in the finance department, strategic planning and operations, and brought a significant measure of civility to the operations department, became the new CEO. The board at that time was dealing with the aftermath of the BNSF merger. And this is after I had left. And they had failed in their attempt to get the Cotton Belt and get into the Chemical Coast in Texas. I'm not sure why they didn't go after KCS, but in any case, they decided Conrail could not survive in the Northeast. And I don't know how much of it was derived by the board and how much of it was Levan's management, but in any case, shareholder value was maximized, management employees were protected, and Conrail was on the way out. Now here's a photograph taken at the Union League when Rush Loving Jr., who's on the right, the guy who wrote The Men Who Love Trains, gave a presentation there. And Dave Levan on the left, and Jim McClellan from Norfolk Southern, who was their vice president of strategic planning and drove the split of Conrail, met for the first time. Those two heard things from each other, and it was a remarkable place to be that night. I was glad to be a fly on the wall for that one. And they did record it. So sometime if it becomes available to hear, it is really quite the story to hear those two guys talking about what they didn't know about what the other was doing during the conflict that led to the split of Conrail. During the Levan era, we continued to invest in things. This is only a sidetrack here with the new ballast that's been spread up in Erie, PA. I don't know why the red markers are on, because this is the head end of an empty coal train, also in Erie County on the former NYC. But you can see it's all new hoppers there, or rebuilt hoppers. Meanwhile, CSX was doing its thing and NS was doing its thing. And the concern was about out west. What was going to happen to the industry and where would Conrail be left? Would BNSF live up to its initials and buy Norfolk Southern first? Would UP merge with CSX? And would Conrail be left out as a glorified terminal railroad? And so we have what we have. Conrail was split up. Arguably the best railroad in the industry at the time it was split up. I would say it was. Things changed over those 20 years, the map significantly. This is not a good comparison. The track, remember that early track with the battered joints and the spikes pulling up? This is out in Indiana from the theater car, and you can see we're going far too fast for what that track would have borne in Ohio 20 years earlier. The equipment, remember those 4 new units that we bought that had been auto train units? Here's the third one of the 4 white lined. They're gone, been replaced. The SD40-2s continued, but SD60Is were there and the SD80 Max. Not on a coal train this time. The office cars changed their appearance. Cabooses, well, cabooses. Here's one in 1976. This is what they looked like in the mid-80s. White lined and parked at Rutherford Yard, waiting sale or scrapping. Government regulation. Part of the caboose thing was a change in regulation. 2 of these 3 trains probably wouldn't have been there for me to take this slide if it hadn't been for deregulation, the Staggers Act. The one on the left is a unit train of anthracite off the Reading and Northern. Conrail probably couldn't have sold those lines without the NERSA Act and deregulation, and we would have abandoned them because the cost of rehab was too high for us to bear with everything else we had. And the stone train on the right was a marketing initiative that was done because we didn't have to file tariffs with the Interstate Commerce Commission. We instead reached a contract with the stone shipper and moved stone on a 24-hour turnaround basis between Annville, Pennsylvania and South Philadelphia. And Wayne Hedman, who was the manager of the stone business at the time, told me that if we had not been able to turn those trains in 24 hours, we couldn't have afforded the equipment. But by being able to do it in 24 hours, we could. It was profitable based on the difference between 24 and 48 hours of turn time. Intermodal continued to grow, double stack, first using the Southern Tier line, and later, thanks to clearance projects, both on the water level and on the Pittsburgh line, meant we were able to do double stacks everywhere. Here they are on their way through Erie again. I spent time in Erie because that's where my wife is from, and we'd go visit her family. So I would go down trackside with her father. Lines were spun off to short lines. This line was a Conrail line that reached from Genesee Junction south of Rochester to Avon, New York. Looks like Avon, but it's Avon, take my word for it. And we spun this line off 1996, I think, to the Livonia, Avon, and Lakeville. Employee productivity improved greatly because we got rid of those commuter trains. You won't see a freight train here anymore. This is Paoli, Pennsylvania. The 1984 figures are self-explanatory, but look at the freight employee number, 37,911 in 1984. When Conrail was folded into Norfolk Southern and CSX, the company had fewer than 19,000 employees, about half of this number, and was still generating the ton miles about the same as they were when they started. Things changed in management, the people changed. Of course, I just emphasized that the number of people went down, but labor relations actually got better. Here's some people, you might recognize one of them, that these are people that either worked with or for me at one point or another. Emery Simkulak on the left, Minor Johnson in the foreground, Joe Ferry in the middle, and of course, Doug in the back. All of whom remained with Conrail for a long time. After the split, things didn't go so well. CSX was making high dives with one car, which meant a train had to sit somewhere so they could move that car of auto parts. NS was pulling Triple Crown trains half the length of the previous one with more than twice as much power, probably in part in an effort on the part of their operating department to get rid of these pains in the butt, which they succeeded in doing with few exceptions. And Jim Newton, a neighbor of mine here, was president of Triple Crown, and he was very upset about its fate because he thought it could have done much better. 1999, this was marked on the side of a Canadian national unit that NS was renting. This is on former Conrail track, and it was parked on the main line on a weekday, not going anywhere, but they recovered. And I think I'm probably awfully close to my time limit. Do you want me to go on and show a few of these or stop now?
He's good.
You've got about 8 minutes left.
Okay, well, I'll rip through these. These are my the sort of things that I got to do either when nobody was looking or just because. For example, commuting was just because I lived in the suburbs. I worked most of the time in central Philadelphia, with the exception of 1 year at Mount Laurel. And during that time, SEPTA had its rail works project going on, and they were deflecting the northern, the former Reading line commuter operations into the upper level of 30th Street using push-pull trains, some of which were powered by former Erie-Lackawanna U-34CHs rented from New Jersey Transit. This is at Fern Rock in Philadelphia. And I got to ride the old Reading blue liners when they weren't blue anymore. Some of them still were. On new employee orientation, I got a tour of Enola Yard before it was renewed. And this is from the top of the hump at Enola. And I had my little Olympus XA there, and I stole a picture while nobody was looking. And I don't think anybody suspected that I was a rail fan, since I was carrying that sort of tourist looking camera, but it had a fine lens on it. Took great pictures. Likewise, this picture was taken from the top of the Anderson's elevator in Maumee, Ohio. This is the Maumee River, and that's spelled M-A-U-M-E-E for those of you who don't know. And this was that project that I mentioned that took the consultants 3 years to respond to. And it was for the Andersons. And I had my camera that day too. I got to ride with some crews. I was commissioned to the operating department, to the industrial engineers out of the marketing department to ride with crews in Buffalo to see if we were charging too little for reciprocal switching. At that time, I also got a tour of Buffalo Central Terminal. And so I got to see the inside of that facility, which few people got to see in later years. It's now had its roof replaced, and it's been stabilized. So maybe it faces a future like Michigan Central and Detroit. Got several tours of Juniata Shoppe. And I got to high rail various places. This is Chuck Allen, who was the assistant general manager in charge of the Southern Tier route, the former Erie-Lackawanna. We were high railing to determine some things with respect to our contract that we had with New York State. And looking at here, you can't tell it, but we're looking at a grain delivery trestle. I went out and accompanied the Operation Lifesaver van. This is in Harrisburg. I had a nice office in Philadelphia. It looked out on the south approaches to 30th Street Station and the High Line. And John Lasson, who was a friend that I had worked with in service design, had the same office on the north side looking at the north approaches to 30th Street. And we had our respective phone numbers on speed dial. So if I saw the ice train coming, I'd call John and say, hey, the ice train's coming. And if he saw the X2000 coming, he'd let me know. Or something on the High Line as well. I was lucky. I was in several positions where I could charter the office car special. And so here we are with an industrial development trip in Pittsburgh, heading from Pittsburgh to Altoona and back. Here is Charlie Marshall, Senior Vice President of Development, and Warner Clark, the Indianapolis head of customer service talking about something on the map. This is completely unposed. I mean, I saw this, had the little camera, snapped the picture, and got this. So I treasure this picture. I was there when we took, I think it was the only office car special that ever went over the Gulf Bridge on the power plant spur that was built up in Lockport, New York. This is Dave Torrey in the middle here, who was the traffic manager for Air Products Company. He was a closet rail fan. That was easily detected if you are a rail fan because of questions he would ask. That is not me in the engineer's hat there. Some people think it is, and it could even fool me if I didn't know I wasn't in the picture. I took it. So I am in the center here. That's Ted Gaikowski on the left and Bruce Mattinger on the right from our industrial development office in Indianapolis. Barbara Risky Jenkins on the step there with Sully, one of the wonderful car attendants that we had for the OCS. I took a similar photograph of him alone. He was polishing the railings on the car, and I said, hold that pose, and I took his picture and I printed it out and gave it to him. And ever thereafter, I got the center roomette in the sleeping car. My boss had to sleep over the trucks. I had the nice, comfortable, rattle-free room in the middle. It's amazing what you can get by being nice to people. It particularly applies to the secretary to the general manager, by the way. We had one trip that didn't go well because we got snowed out and our guests couldn't get back to their offices. So we went into Conway Yard and we put them up overnight in the sleeping cars. It was a little noisy because we were sleeping next to the hump, but I don't know who decided on that, but maybe they decided they'd punish management. I'm not sure. Here's the theater car on our way to Bob Downing's retirement. Among people I can identify here are Bill Shepard with the mustache and the balding hairline on the right there. The guy with the white hair in the foreground, Jeremy Watmile, he was vice president of purchasing. The guy next to him is Bob Swert. He was vice president of labor relations. The guy behind Bob was Joe Folk. He was a marketing assistant VP at the time. Ron Bowes in the yellow sweater over here. He was in planning and transportation planning. I think that's Bill Wolfhorst back there, Agent W, the guy who took all the films that helped shoot down the idea of divestiture for as a solution to the competitive issues of Norfolk Southern Conrail in the 80s. And this is my wife Joyce right here in the bow tie. We went through the bathtub in North Jersey, which has since been a common thing, but at the time, I think this was the first trip for the OCS through the bathtub. I got to ride the dome car a few times, including chartering it for its first trip under the wires out of 30th Street. And here are a couple of notables from the railroad publishing business, Paul Withers and Dan Cupper. We did joint trains too, where Conrail provided the power and Del Otsego provided the equipment, and we entertained New York State legislators. Somebody chartered the Mountain View and put it on the Pennsylvanian after a Pennsylvania State Rail Freight Conference, and I got to ride it from Pittsburgh to Paoli. Here I'm on board. Roy Blanchard on the left, and I'm not sure who's on the right. That's my last Conrail picture taken in Ravenna, Ohio in 1999. And this is my last Conrail action picture. This is, you'll remember that one earlier where I said Doug was there at South Fork. This is looking the other direction as dusk fell. And that's it. I got it all in.
Good
Yay.
timing.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Cool.
Those are some great photos.
Yeah, and some of those Conrail press photos are things that I have never seen before, especially some of the boardroom stuff and
Yeah.
some of the executive stuff. That's some
I
great
have-
stuff.
I have a one of those metal double deck 600 slide boxes, basically full of Conrail culls. When I left Conrail, I became a consultant, and my first consulting job was with Conrail. And the public affairs department hired me. Doug and I were sort of branded as we didn't have a company photographer, and Doug and I were called the company photographers because we showed up in the calendars so often. They knew that I knew photography, so they said, well, why don't you go through our photograph files and get rid of the stuff that we don't need anymore? And I said, okay. I said, let me ask you a question. Can I have any of the stuff that I'm getting rid of? And they said, yes, provided that it doesn't have identification on it for the photographer, because that stuff's copyrighted. So you'll notice there were a couple of them there in South Philadelphia that had Art Wilkinson's name on them. I picked those anyhow because I know Art.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I called him afterwards and I said, I got these pictures. You want them back? No, he said, I don't want them back. So he didn't take them back. There was one other guy, and I can't remember his name right now, unfortunately, but I have taken a number of his, and I called him and I said, I've got these pictures. Do you want them back? And he said, yes. So I gave them back to him. I held some of them back to use in a future book because they would fit with my theme. But I'm obliged to return them to him when I'm done, and he gets credit for those. They won't show up as Conrail photos. But I've got a number of Conrail photos that they're useful for things like this, but they certainly would be useful to the society. And you're welcome to have them, basically. So, and my other stuff that I took, there's a lot of it there that I'm more than willing to share. So I don't see any point in hoarding them. You know, if they don't get shared, they don't serve any purpose.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was really cool. That was a really great presentation. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. I see some chats here.
Yeah, a bunch of thank
People
yous.
to thank
Yeah.
you and fantastic and wonderful.
All right, people are making my head swell here.
There you go. Nice.
Beautiful
Right.
job, Larry. Thanks,
No,
man.
no questions. All right, that's okay then.
Cool. All right, we will go on to Mr. Zeolla.
Yeah.
Bob, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Thanks.
All right.
All right.
You got screen share all set up, so go for it.
Okie doke. So what we're going to talk about, what I was asked to speak about here was mostly the research that I've done in coming up with the concept and design of my model railroad, which is Conrail's Conemaugh line. So the bulk of my presentation is going to be covering that. And by the way, Larry, thank you. It's a hard act to follow with all the history you've got.
Well, one works with what one has. You know, I can't. There are things I can't talk about, like modeling the Conemaugh line. So
there you go. In 1976, I was just a sophomore in college, and I had a lot of other things on my mind besides railroad. Yeah, but so I modeled the Conemaugh line, and I've got a Facebook page with that. You know, you can get to it through that URL. You don't need a Facebook account to see it if you wanted to look into more of what I'm going to be talking about today. Okay, so I've done this presentation a couple of times. If you've gone to any of the RPM meets, either in Philadelphia or in Pittsburgh, you may have seen these slides. I've changed them somewhat because last time I did that was maybe 3-4 years ago. But pretty much what I'm going to talk about is the conception of how and why I chose the Conemaugh line and where I kind of gathered a lot of my information for getting it as right as possible. And then I've got some slides on, how I built it and, some of the aspects of that. And then lastly, on the operation of it, because I built my railroad to operate. It's not for show. It's not to just look at, although it's kind of cool. But I built it for operations, and we do operate it on a regular basis. And COVID kind of cut into that a bit, but I've had at least a half a dozen operating sessions over the last 12 months, so I'm pretty proud of that as well. So why Conrail in 1978? Well, I had been part of other operating groups and gone to different railroads. I had collected some motive power myself, and what I liked, what I saw elsewhere, and what I liked because it was going to enable me to use a lot of the motive power that I already owned for my model railroad, was the fact that not only would I be able to model Conrail Blue in 1978, but I could also model other roads patched for Conrail. And by the way, Larry, thank you. The only reason, well, I assume by now I would have done it, but 2 years into it, I think it was about 2 years into it, I was talking with Larry, and we were talking about my railroad, and he said, "What do you mean you haven't patched all of your locomotives yet? Don't you know that was the first thing that Conrail did?" Because they had to, of course. So Larry, thank you. Because of you, all of my locomotives are patched. Okay, so yeah, so I've got, as you can see, I've got my share of Lehigh Valley, ex-Lehigh Valley motive power, and I've got a D&H engine thrown in there too, because obviously, as Larry said, they would get motive power from wherever they could. I've got my share of Erie-Lackawanna patched locomotives. I've got Reading. You can see Penn Central there on the right and some Conrail Blue in the middle. That's why I chose 1978, because it was going to give me a lot of variety in what I was running, and not just an entire blue fleet, although there's nothing wrong with that either. All right. Why Conemaugh? Well, as a kid, I grew up in New York City, but my father was from Brackenridge, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. And actually that brick house there on the right is my grandparents' house. And twice or three times a year, we would take a trip to visit my grandparents. And I would have the luxury of sitting on those front steps, and right across the street, those tracks you see are the Conemaugh line. Now, back then, I had no idea where that train was coming from, where those trains were going to. All I knew was that, wow, isn't it cool to be able to see these trains all day, every day while I'm visiting? And that's why I chose the Conemaugh line, because that was my history there. So I'm going to talk about some of the resources that I used in researching the Conemaugh line and figuring out how I wanted to build and how I wanted to operate the model railroad that I currently have. And again, I'm going to give a shout out to somebody else who's on the call. I'm going to thank Doug Watts. He turned me on to two particular magazines that were, older magazines. I didn't start designing the Conemaugh line until 2007 or 8, I guess. But he turned me on to this April 1990 issue of Rail Pace magazine, which actually did a feature on the Conemaugh line. And many of you may know or may not know, there is not a whole lot published regarding the Conemaugh. There's a book that the Pennsylvania Railroad Technical and Historical Society put out on the Conemaugh line, but that's based upon Pennsylvania Railroad timeframe. There's a couple of magazines, which I'm going to show you today, but other than that, you don't see a whole lot of pictures. You don't see any other books or publications that really focus on this. I actually found one picture in Conrail Commodities, that book. There is one picture of trains on the Conrail line, and that's really the only thing I've ever seen in any major publication. So Rail Pace in 1990 had this article on the Conemaugh line, and this is blocking my view. I want to get that out of the way. Okay, so talks about a lot of things regarding this piece of the railroad. It mentions here, as you can see, the most notable is Allegheny Ludlam Steel. That is a steel mill that was right along the Conemaugh line that actually was within a mile of my grandparents' house. So when I used to go visit there, off in the distance, there I would see it belching out that orange smoke that back in that day in the 60s and early 70s, you saw coming out of steel mills. That steel mill is still there today, by the way. And when I went back there, it is as clean as could be. They actually just spent lots and lots of money, millions of dollars, on a new integrated rolling mill, whatever they call it, the continuous production facility. So that steel mill is doing well, and it is thriving. But in any event, so this article in Rail Pace talks about the Conemaugh, talks about that it is a. Hey Maurice, can you mute? Thanks. It talks about the fact that it is redundant. It does parallel the Pittsburgh line. It is 13 miles longer and it has lower speed limits, right? Primarily because you can, if you read this part that I've circled here, what the Conemaugh lacks in gradient, it makes up for in curvature and length, right? Curves in excess of 6 degrees. It talks about where they are, and it talks about, limiting the speed to only 30 miles an hour. So yes, it was redundant. Yes, it had disadvantages. So why keep it? Well, there were online industries, notably Allegheny Ludlam Steel, okay, and other steel mills. There are coal industries along that area, right? Coal was big in the Pittsburgh area, in Western Pennsylvania, even into the 60s and 70s. And it has that water level profile. The steepest grade is only 0.6% along the entire line. So therefore, it made a superior line for not necessarily just manifest freight, but for their mineral and bulk commodities. And if I'm not mistaken, if I believe today, it is single track. It was double track, back in the day, back in the time period I'm modeling, and also when I was a kid and I used to see it, it was a double track main line. Today it's single track, and today it primarily services eastbound unit trains and bulk commodities. That's pretty much where it's at today. So this Rail Pace article was very helpful. It had a nice map of the Conemaugh line. As you can see, on the east, it diverges from the Pittsburgh line at CP Conpit, which is just west of Johnstown. From there, it follows the Conemaugh River, right? And then that Conemaugh River becomes forgive me if I mispronounce this, the Kiskiminetas River at Salzburg. And I've been there and I've seen Salzburg, and there's remnants of an industry that I actually model on my railroad there. Salzburg is named because they used to mine salt there. I thought that was kind of fascinating when I found out. So it continues along the Kiski River here, up at Freeport. It crosses over the Allegheny River, turns left and goes southwest now along the river, the Allegheny River, through the Rivertown area and into Pittsburgh, and joins up with the Fort Wayne line at CP Penn. Okay, so that is the Conemaugh line, what you're seeing right in front of you. The portion that I model is a pretty good size of it. On the west, I start at CP Penn on my railroad and using selective compression and eliminating things, because obviously when you model a railroad, you need to do that. I model from CP Penn up through Freeport, Kiski, that's really the centerpiece of my railroad, and then down to about CP Apollo. That's where my railroad kind of goes into staging on the east end. So that's the portion that I model. I also model the branch line to Butler, as you can see here, the Allegheny Secondary, which went up to Kittanning and points beyond. That connected it to the Conrail. I think it was called the low grade, although Larry mentioned low grade, he was referring to the old Erie-Lackawanna main, but Conrail also had a low grade secondary, I think it was referred to, that ran between Phillipston, Pennsylvania, on the Allegheny River, and connected over to the over by Renovo, to that line there. And I actually met and knew a guy that out in Pittsburgh area that modeled that railroad. So his railroad came as far as CP Kiski, which I thought was kind of interesting. All right. So I modeled the Butler branch. I modeled the Allegheny Secondary. I also modeled the interchange with the Pittsburgh and Shoppe here at Freeport. Freeport was a pretty busy area between Freeport and across the river at Kiski. Okay, the Allegheny Ludlam Steel Mill that I model is not at Trenham here. It's just in that area. It's in Brackenridge, Pennsylvania. Okay, and that's what the map looks like. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. There's a little bit of history of this line. It was started as a canal route in 1834. The Pennsylvania Railroad kind of took over what was being built and partially built in 1865. And you'll have to forgive me, I don't know what the 1903 in parens means, but it's there for a reason. The Pennsy used it primarily for Pittsburgh to Buffalo traffic. All right, so coming from Pittsburgh up along the river, and then the Allegheny Secondary north towards Buffalo. In 1940, this was one of the first lines that the PRR instituted cab signals on. That was their experiment back there in the 40s. 46, there was a little bit of a rerouting of the Conemaugh line because of a dam project along that Kiski River. 78 to 79, Conrail CTC implementation, the Pittsburgh area consolidation affected the Conemaugh line. And I put that in 1982, Kiski Yard was closed. Since Kiski Yard is the centerpiece of my railroad, that's why I'm sort of in the late 70s area, because if I went any later than that, Kiski Yard wouldn't be there. And in 1987, as I mentioned earlier, that's when it was converted over to single track operation. All right, the second piece of information that I was able to get, and again, I believe it was thanks to Doug Watts because he turned me on to this older magazine, was a Rails Northeast from October of 78. That issue was dedicated to rail operations around Pittsburgh. And there's a photo of the cover of it that I have. All right. In that magazine, there was lots of information with regards to freight schedules and trains that ran in and around Pittsburgh. And I've kind of highlighted in these blue boxes the trains that kind of mattered to me. So there's a CRB2 that ran daily from Conway, right? So there's Conway East there to Phillipston, right? And I model that train on my railroad, okay? KC2 runs daily from Conway up to Kiski, right? That brings cars, it services the Conemaugh division, the Conemaugh line, right? And then down here tells you the makeup of those two trains, all right? So that CRB, it had cars for Kiski, it had cars for Oil City, cars for Phillipston, and then at Kiski would pick up more Phillipston cars. And that's basically what I have in my railroad. I have on the CRB, there are cars that come up to Kiski and get set out there. There are cars that go through to Oil City and Phillipston. And then at Kiski, that train will pick up other cars that are heading toward Phillipston. Okay. And then the KC2, you can see that's in similar fashion. Cars for Sharpsburg, B&O at Millvale. There's a B&O interchange at Millvale, PA, and I'll talk about that later when I talk about how I design my railroad. There's cars for West Trenham on that. That's pronounced Trenham by the locals. Then there's Butler cars, okay, set off at the Butler Yard at Freeport, PA, and that would be Harris Siding, and you'll see that also later. And then there's also a block for Etna and then the pickup at Etna as well. So this magazine had a lot of information regarding what trains ran and what they were made up of, which helped a lot when it came to designing my operation. Okay, it also had trains that were made up at Etna Yard. There was a local SWT. For those of you who might be familiar, early on in Conrail, they used the and I've been told this. I don't know this firsthand. Larry, you probably can confirm this. This is all Penn Central nomenclature for how they named their trains early on in Conrail. So SWT would be Sharpsburg to West Trenham. And then one would be one direction and the SWT2 would be the other direction, right? This train only ran, I guess, Saturdays and Sundays, maybe daily and Saturdays and Sundays, but it was a local. So it had cars for Blonox, for Creighton, for West Trenham, Natrona, and then it returned, right? So that's a turn. I modeled that on my railroad. At Kiski Junction, the trains that were put together were as listed here. I've taken the liberty and the modeler's liberty. I don't have a KB1 and a KBO1. All right, they both go up the Butler branch. KB1 was the local that served the industries along the Butler branch. The KBO was that was just interchange for the BL&E and then Saxonburg ore. I combined those two trains, so the KB really has the interchange trains as well. All right, I modeled this KC1W and KC1E as you may or may not know. Conway had an east yard and a west yard, and trains were sent there based upon the direction that car was going once it got to Conway. Okay, but this magazine again had plenty of information for me to kind of fill out the trains that would run on my Conemaugh line. All right, then moving on from there, I got my hands on a Conrail freight schedule from June of '78. Okay, this also kind of confirmed a lot of what I saw, but added to it as well. Okay, you can see classifications made at various yards, and this is classifications made at Conway East. All right, and here's the train KC2 that went to Etna that we saw in that previous slide. Here is CRB2 and KC2 that went to Kiski Junction that we saw in that previous slide as well. All right, classifications made at various yards. Here is trains that were going to be built at or pass through Etna, Pennsylvania. Okay. Then the Conrail freight schedule also had information for me on ore trains. All right, in Saxonburg, Pennsylvania, U.S. Steel had a sintering plant, and a lot of ore came from east and west to that sintering plant. So of course, it all went up the Butler secondary, and of course, I had to model it on my railroad. So I've got 2 ore trains that run on my model railroad based upon the information that I've gotten off this Conrail freight schedule. Right, I modeled the 401 coming from Ashtabula from the west, and I also modeled the 201 coming from Baltimore. All right, and then conversely, we have empty ore trains going back to those 2 respective places, and that would be the UXB 20 and UXA 20, which is UXA 40, which is the Ashtabula one, and UXB 20, which would be the Baltimore train. So I've got the loaded ore and then the empty ore going back. All right. Next train, empty hopper trains. You can see I found that there was empty hoppers from Enola to Kiski, the XEK1. All right. I model empty hopper trains. I've got a coal loading industry on my railroad where the loads come from. I also interchange with the Pittsburgh and Shoppe for loads of coal. They head out and the empties come back to Kiski. Okay, more from the Conrail freight schedule. I did notice there was only one through train, the PIEN, Pittsburgh to Enola, but the PIEN-A actually used the Conemaugh, whereas you can see here the PIEN-B did not. It stopped at Conemaugh. That was a location along the main line, the Pittsburgh line, but that's not the Conemaugh line. But you see here, PIN-A stops at Etna, oops, I'm sorry, didn't mean to click there, stops at Etna, stops at Kiski. What it does at Etna, it takes cars behind block 1. Block 1 is Altoona Perishables, and it takes Enola cars. And at Kiski, it does a similar, it doesn't set out anything here. Again, modeling license, I needed to be able to set out because my train size is limited, and I feel like having an empty train coming out of staging. So I do set outs and pickups. But again, it's based upon the research that I did on the Conrail freight schedule. Another resource that I leveraged quite a bit was the ZITS maps. All right. This is a map of Kiski Yard. And when I first built Kiski Yard, I kind of conferred with some friends of mine, and what I decided was, you know what, if this layout worked for Conrail and worked for the Pennsylvania and Penn Central before that, it should work for me. So I built basically Kiski Yard to look like exactly what you see in this picture. All right, it's a little longer, of course, this is not to scale, but that's what I built originally. And actually, after the first 2 or 3 or 4 operating sessions, The only recommendation that was made by the yard operators, and I agreed with basically, was take these two tracks, 844 and 845, and instead of cutting them in here, extend them all the way so they're longer. And I did that. But other than that, my Kiski yard matches what was on the map and it works just fine. So word to somebody figuring out how to do a model railroad, if you can do it the way the real railroad did it, it should work for you, because if it worked for them, it's going to work for you. Also from these maps, I was able to look at layouts and see where other sidings and interchange tracks were. You can see here, this is Freeport, Pennsylvania on the map. And this area here is Harris siding. You can see there 232, that's Harris siding. Right, CP Beale is here, CP Harris is here, both on my railroad, and this is the Butler secondary heading up off to Butler. This is an important area on the railroad because not only is that the access to the Butler secondary, but most of the trains going to Butler are coming from the east, coming from the right-hand side here. So they have to turn at the siding, and they use the siding and the 203 track here in order to do that. Okay, so this is a critical part of the operation in the town of Freeport. Also, you can see here on the right, they show the Pittsburgh and Shawmut interchange tracks. All right, so that's also on my railroad. I modeled that. And then across the river, and we'll see that next, that goes up to Kiski Junction. All right. I also used the Conrail's its maps to put a couple of industries along the railroad. Down in Blawnox, Pennsylvania, I've got Blawnox Equipment. That's number 740, which is this track right here. Blawnox Equipment is kind of famous for, they were the first heavy equipment company to design a paving machine. Okay, so the Blawnox paving machine was kind of one of the earlier machines that actually laid blacktop on highways and whatnot. Beckwith Machinery is over here, and I modeled them as well as a siding here for the Sun Oil Company. So again, where did I get my information from? Primarily these three sources that I've spoken to you about as far as publications and things that are written down. Other than that, I was able to go online and find a lot of information. Online maps, Google Maps is a great source for finding information about how things are laid out and what things existed. This is an aerial view of Freeport, Pennsylvania. This is the Allegheny River. The Kiski-Manatus River is over here on the right. And to be honest with you, I don't know what that, I think that's called Buffalo Creek, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me right. Okay, and so this is the aerial view of Freeport, Pennsylvania. That circle there, that is Harris siding. And this line you see coming up here and underneath the highway, that is the Butler secondary leaving the Conemaugh. This is the Conemaugh here. Okay, so that's Harris siding and CP Harris. That is the interchange with the Pittsburgh and Shawmut that we're looking at here in that circle. Pittsburgh and Shawmut is this line you see going up there, and here's the Conemaugh going across the Allegheny River. That's a very cool bridge, and I modeled that bridge on my railroad too. And lastly, this area, this is CP Kiski, where to the right off of the photo is Kiski Yard, and heading north here is the Allegheny Secondary, heading up to Katanning and points north. The Allegheny Secondary is southbound at this point. Well, today it doesn't exist any longer. I don't recall if it connected back in 1978. It may have, but again, I don't recall that. I don't model that portion of the area. Then also field trips are a big part of understanding the railroad that you're trying to model. All right. This is a photo I took of that bridge across the Allegheny River. And I have to say, I think I've done a pretty good job, because the bridge that I built on my railroad looks very similar to that. And then just upstream from there, this is the other bridge, that's the Allegheny Secondary heading north. You can see different type of truss bridges. I'm an engineer by training. It's been many years though, so I don't remember the names of the different truss, whether that's a Warren truss or whatever. But Both of those bridges are modeled on my railroad. Field trips are a very important part of coming up with your operating scheme and model railroad. Here's some photos I took of the Allegheny Ludlam Steel Mill. Actually, in thinking about this, both of these photos, both of the buildings in these photos don't exist any longer. The photo on the left, this building was torn down and they replaced it with that new modern continuous rolling facility that they built. This is in Brackenridge, Pennsylvania. This is their Natrona plant, which is the next town over. This whole, since they put that new facility in, this whole facility became unneeded. So this has all been torn down. But I think this is a very neat picture and it was worth sharing. All right, so field trips are important here. And then lastly, as far as resources go, I had mentors. All right, a lot of you may know the name Ken McCory. He's got a huge railroad here in the Philadelphia area. He modeled, over different periods of time, he's modeled the Penn he's modeled the Penn Central, he's modeled Conrail. He was one of the reasons why I chose early Conrail, because the Conrail he modeled was the early Conrail, the rainbow years as they're called. And I learned a lot from Ken with regards to operations and modeling these different railroads. Doug Clay, who unfortunately is no longer with us, he modeled the Lehigh Valley and the Reading up in the Allentown area. I think I learned the most from Doug with regards to railroading in general and operations. You know, I owe a lot to the things that Doug taught me and showed me with regards to building a railroad and operating a railroad. And then lastly, Jim Dahlberg, he still, has his operating session once a week. These days he's modeling the DL&W, but he's a big EL fan. His original railroad, and I had the opportunity to operate on that, and that's probably going back over 20 years, was a fictitious railroad he called the New Jersey Northern, the NJN. But these three gentlemen really were my mentors, and they were my inspiration for doing this and doing it right. Okay, so that covers the conception and the research I did with regard to my railroad. Now I'm going to talk a little about how I constructed it and what I built. Okay, so I had to make a lot of decisions, all right? And based on the experience I had at the time, and remember, my railroad's been around now for maybe 8 or 9 years, maybe 10. So I had 10 years of experience because I moved down to the Philadelphia area in 1996. And prior to that, I was living in New York and I didn't have space or time for a model railroad. But once I moved here, I had a big house, I had the space, I found the time, and I had the interest. So the first thing I did was I built my circle in the basement, as most everybody has done, right? But then I started going to operating sessions and experiencing what Ken had built, what Doug had built, what Jim has, along with others in the area that had operations. So I kind of based my decisions on the experience I had at those places, right? I understood that staging was a must-have. You need a place for trains to go to and a place for trains to come from. Without that, you really don't have operations, or it's very difficult to have an operation. I also understood that run length was important. I've been on operating railroads where you pull out a staging, you go a couple of feet and you're in the yard and you're done. No fun there. Run length was important, or is important, right? And the operation had to be interesting, all right? I've also been at other operating railroads where it really is not interesting to be there, all right? You run a train, you go to the yard, you do set outs and pickups, and you go into staging. And then you come out the other end of staging, you do set outs and pickups, you go into staging. And it's just the same thing over and over. No fun. The operation has to be interesting. That was something that was a must-have for me as well, all right? And based upon my experience operating on everybody else's railroad, a dispatcher and a car card system were a must-have as well, because again, you need to have a purpose for running the trains. That's what the car card system does for you. And a dispatcher to make things flow was also something I wanted to do. Now, I chose a car card system over like a switch list because I've also operated on other railroads that have switch lists. And I find that holding an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper in your hand while you're trying to operate trains with the throttle and everything is cumbersome. Having cards which fit in the palm of my hand works a lot better. That's my opinion, right? That's why I chose car card systems. So that was the decisions that I based upon my operating experience. Other decisions I based upon the information that I gathered, such as the stuff that we went through in the previous slides, all right? Based upon that, I determined Kiski Yard was going to be the focal point of my railroad, all right? Almost all of the trains that run or ran on the Conemaugh stop at Kiski to set out, pick up, or do something. So Kiski Yard was the focal point. I also wanted to model Etna and West Trenham yards, okay, based upon the information that I had gathered, right? I wanted some local industries to be included because I knew they were there, right, based upon those ITS maps that I had, but I also wanted the operation to be interesting. Local industries add interest, okay? And I also knew, based upon the Conrail freight schedule and that other magazine that I saw that had all the list of the trains, that I could have plenty of trains to run. That wouldn't be a problem. So given these decisions, I started out to build my railroad, all right? But the other thing I needed to decide on was how big and how was I going to use the space I had. I only had a small basement, 18 feet by 32 feet with a 7-foot ceiling. Problem there is that my house, the garage is under my house. All right. If I ever had to do it over again, I'd never buy a house with the garage underneath. The garage should be a separate building. All right. So my house, only half the house is basement. That's why it's so small, 18 by 32. All right. Not only was it 18 by 32 is the size of the basement, the space for the railroad was only 18 by 16, even smaller. So what that led me to decide on is I needed multiple levels. Okay. And you'll see how I built that coming up. Other considerations that I took into account when I was designing it, this was my space in the basement. I wanted a room to relax and watch TV when I'm not operating. I also had to take into account that my furnace is in the basement. I couldn't use that space. And I am married and I have a wife, so I needed to have storage space in the basement. Right. So all of those decisions had to be taken into account and made before I could start building. So I'm going to go through a series of slides that show the floor plan. This is the empty basement. Okay, so 18 across, it's 32 long, but only 16 of that is really usable, although I did squeeze more into it, more than that 16 feet. The furnace is in this area here behind a wall, and we've got storage back in this area here, again, behind another wall. Here's the entrance to the garage, the stairs going upstairs. And this is the desk I built for the dispatcher for the railroad. Level 1, it's a 3-level railroad that I built, by the way. Level 1 has staging, Etna Yard, and Blawnox, Pennsylvania. Okay, staging is 10 tracks along that back wall. On the west, which is this side, it represents Federal Street. On the right, which is this side, it represents Johnstown. It's double-ended staging, so trains can run straight through. Okay. I also have originally, staging included trains heading to Butler and trains heading to the Allegheny Secondary. So everything went back to this 10-track staging originally, and we'll see how that changed over time. Etna Yard here on the left receives cars for local industries and the interchange with the Baltimore and Ohio, which was in Etna at the time. Okay, Blawnox, Pennsylvania, this strip in front of staging along the bottom, that had the 3 industries that I originally had on my railroad: Sun Oil Company, Blawnox Equipment, and Beckwith Machinery that we spoke about earlier when we were talking about the maps. Level 2 on my railroad is primarily Kiski Yard and Kiski Junction. All right, Kiski Yard again receives cars for local industries. The KB1 and KB2 transfer train to and from Butler, in and out of Kiski Yard. The KA1 and KA2, that was a local turn that went east from Kiski. And on my original railroad, what it did is it left Kiski Yard and went down helix into station. that originates at Kiski Yard. XKT2 and the UEN1, loaded coal and empty coal. I think the UEN is the loaded, the XKT is the empty. They originate and terminate at Kiski Yard. And like I said earlier, all other manifest trains that ran on the Conemaugh, most all either stop to set out or pick up at Kiski Yard. So as you can see, Kiski Yard is the whole length of the width of the basement. It's on the second level. It is the center point of my railroad. And then at Kiski Junction here on the left, that was the access to the Allegheny Secondary as it was on the real thing. On level 3, I built West Trenham Yard. That again receives cars for local industries. It receives traffic to the Allegheny Ludlam Steel Mill, and it originates the SWT, the Sharpsburg to West Trenham, and the SWT2, which is the return local turn to Etna. So we get a local that goes, and those trains service the Sun Oil Company, Beckwith Machinery, and Blonox Industries. Okay, and also at Harris Siding over here on the left, that's the access to the Butler Secondary. Okay, and in all 3 of these drawings you've seen so far, there's been Helix 1 and Helix 2. The original helixes I built for my railroad. When I built them, I quickly realized they basically had to be bulletproof, because once you put your next turn over the first turn, you can't get to the first turn anymore. It's very difficult. So the original helixes I built were 22-inch radius Atlas snap track, because I didn't want to have to deal with flex track and doing the joints and having to make sure that was bulletproof. I felt that Atlas flex track 22-inch radius would serve the purpose, and it did. It served the purpose very well. Actually, Helix 2 is still in use. And there's nothing wrong with hidden track being Atlas snap track, believe me. So the first expansion I did was I had a group over from actually in Western Pennsylvania. It was the only group that has ever operated in my railroad that actually knows the locations, which was kind of fun. But they pointed out to me that my Etna yard did not have a yard lead, and it was very difficult to classify cars without a yard lead, and I agreed with that. So I kind of put this little appendage on this wall and called it Millvale, PA. And that was built basically for the Etna yard lead, but it gave me the opportunity to add 2 additional industries to the railroad. H.J. Heinz, of course, I'm in Pittsburgh, you got to have Heinz, and another industry called Ascon, which is sort of an asphalt plant, sort of a steel scrapyard type of industry. And that's basically on this area here in Millvale. Expansion 2. Prior to expansion 2, anything going to the Allegheny Secondary or the Butler Secondary would go down the helix and back into staging, as I explained earlier. What I decided to do during expansion 2 was, you know what, I'm going to build an Allegheny Secondary, and I was able to pop a hole in that wall and put some track against the wall behind my furnace. And now when I have trains that go to the Allegheny Secondary, the train that goes there, it just sits back in there. It works perfectly. And then also over Helix 2, I was able to build the Butler Secondary along this wall. And this is relatively high, so it's not, it's like at eye level for most people, a little over my eye level. But now the Butler trains and the Allegheny Secondary trains don't just go into staging, they have their own place to go. Okay, so Butler Secondary is accessed from Harris Siding, the KB train goes there and comes from there, and also the ore trains for Saxonburg go there and come from there. The Allegheny Secondary, it's the CRB and the RBC. Okay, expansion 3, this was the biggest expansion I had. I took that 22-inch radius helix and I tore it out and I replaced it with a much larger helix, 30-inch plus radius. It went from single track 22-inch to a 3-track 30-inch radius helix. It is really improved the operation significantly. And I've got some pictures showing how I built it, and we'll get to that in a little while. The Avonmore, Pennsylvania was built as part of this expansion. You access that at CP Leach on level 2, coming out of Kiski Yard. I was able to add 4 industries here: General Refractories, National Rolling Mill, and Reynolds Manufacturing, all that I got from the Conrail ZITS maps. So, you know, they were all there, and they actually were serviced by Conrail. And Leechburg Mining, which is a coal loading facility to deal with those hopper trains that I run as well. And then lastly, expansion 4, I built my Allegheny Ludlam steel mill over the top of Helix 1. It includes an electric furnace and rolling mill, plus other smaller buildings. Allegheny Ludlam, as I mentioned earlier, one of the few remaining steel mills in the Pittsburgh area. I believe it's been able to maintain itself because it does produce specialty type sheet steel products. It's not your run-of-the-mill, pardon the pun, steel mill. It produces specialty products. Actually, I've got some stainless steel flatware, you know, forks and spoons and whatnot, knives from when I was a kid that have an Allegheny Ludlam stamp on the back of it. And somebody told me, you've got stainless steel that was actually made in the US. That's pretty rare. So there you go. All right, here's a line drawing of the railroad that I built. On the west, we come from Johnstown, and it leads right into Kiski Yard, and the Avonmore branch going off here, as we saw in the plans. From Kiski Yard heading east, I'm sorry, from the east, we're coming from Johnstown. Heading west from Kiski Yard, the Allegheny Secondary goes off behind the furnace, as we saw in those other diagrams. This diagram doesn't show it, but in this dotted line area, the interchange for the Pittsburgh and Charlotte, I added that as well. We go up the helix, and that's what this dotted line represents. This is level 2. Go up the helix to level 3. The top of level 3, you hit Harris Siding, and the Butler branch goes off from there. Further along on level 3 is West Trenham Yard, and then Allegheny Ludlam Steel would be at the far end of West Trenham Yard. This is the second helix, the helix rebuilt, helix number 1 rebuilt. You can see it shows 2 tracks as opposed to this one showing 1. So that's there. And then on level 1, here's my industries, the original ones, Sun Oil Company, Blowlox Equipment, and Beckwith Machinery. Then we lead to Etna Yard and the B&O interchange out of Etna Yard. And then heading west from there would be Federal Street and Conway Yard. That's the railroad that I built. We've been operating now probably for about 9 years, and guys keep coming back. So I must have done something right, I think, huh? Okay, so I have a couple of photos here of the helix reconstruction. This is after I ripped out the older helix, the 22-inch radius helix. What you're seeing here, this is the back of the 32-inch TV that I use as my CTC panel. I use JMRI to build that. You'll see a photo of that coming up. This is originally my switches into staging were controlled with a diode matrix type of mechanism. I've since ripped that out, and I use all stationary decoders now, but originally it was all diode matrix, and it was fun building that, believe me. A little tedious, but it was fun building it because it was satisfying once it was done. All right, so that's the empty space where the helix was going to be built. The most important thing that I found with the helix is a solid foundation, and that's the framing that I put in for the foundation of the helix. You'll see it's not a square, it's rectangular. So I've got some straight sections of the helix on either end, and you'll see that in the next photo, I believe. There you go. The most important thing when you build a helix is figuring out the grade of your first turn, okay? Because everything builds upon that, all right? So with the use of an Excel spreadsheet and a little math, a little geometry that I learned back in high school and college, I was able to figure this out. And I've got my grade coming up the helix for the first turn, as you can see. This is the same area. Now I've put Homosote on it and started laying my track, because as I mentioned earlier, when you're building a helix, you have to understand that you cannot get to a level once you put, it's very difficult to get to a level once you put another level on top of it. So you have to build the entire thing as you go, okay? My first helix I built with 1/2-inch plywood and no Homosote or cork. This helix, in talking with some of the folks that I knew, and actually Ken McCory in particular, he said to me, he said, listen, not a lot of weight on there. you don't need 1/2-inch plywood. And he said, and he strongly recommended I use Homosote, which I use on the rest of the railroad as well. So what I decided to do for this helix was I laminated 1/4-inch plywood and Homosote. So I would cut the shapes, laminate them together with contact cement, and that's what you're seeing in front of you. So this is a 1/2-inch Homosote and a 1/4-inch plywood. It was a lot cheaper to build with 1/4-inch plywood. Plus, it was a lot easier to maneuver the pieces than 1/2-inch plywood. And it works fine. It's been in place probably for 7 or 8 years at this point, and it works just fine. Okay, so for anybody interested, that's what I built it out of. 1/4-inch plywood and Homosote laminated together using contact cement. And as you can see, it's 3 tracks. The outside track, it comes from, that is the main line single track from CP Leach, which is east of Kiski Yard, and that heads down into staging. The inner 2 tracks are part of the main line. They head from level 3 at CP Acme down all the way to level 1 and come out at CP Harmar. Okay. And here it is progressing. You can see here's the single track that's coming from Kiski Yard. That's what this is, and goes around and then out to staging on the bottom. And here's the other 2 tracks that are going from level 1 to level 3, and they're continuing up one more turn beyond that. And that's the helix, reconstruction in progress. And this is the helix reconstruction still, well, this is pretty much completed. The connection is made at the top, and the connection is made here at level 2, and the connections are made down at the bottom. But as I said earlier, before you put the next level on, you've got to make sure that that track is bulletproof. You got to run trains on it. You got to run cars on it. You got to make sure your joints are good. You have to file a lot of the joints down to make sure everything is smooth running. And for the most part, the helixes work pretty well on my railroad. All right, there it is. After I got everything put back together and reconnected, the helix is buried under here. This is the level 3 railroad coming out and going down the helix. Down here, this is level 2, where the railroad, the trains come out and head into Kiski Yard. These tracks in the foreground, that's that Avonmore area that I built. This is the cold loading. These 2 are for the cold loading facility. Then the other industries around the corner here. This track in the foreground coming toward us is heading over to General Refractories, where they make refractory brick, of course. This is the area where I ultimately would build Allegheny Ludlam Steel Mill. I believe the next slide shows that. And on the left here, you see West Trenham Yard. And there's the steel mill with no cars in it, but pretty much the buildings that I had made for it in place. And again, West Trenham Yard on the left there. And this is the outbound cars from the steel mill, finished products out. And these 2 tracks here are the raw materials coming into the electric furnace to be melted down. Statistics. So here's a summary of my railroad. It is HO scale. All right, Conrail Conemaugh line from CP Penn to CP Apollo with Butler, Avonmore, and Allegheny Secondary. The length of the main line is about 300 feet of double track on 3 levels, including the 2 helixes we've seen. I have a double-ended 10-track staging, each 132 inches in length, representing Federal Street and Johnstown. I've got 3 tracks up at the Butler branch and 1 track at the Allegheny Secondary. Helix 1 is 3 tracks, 31.5 inches on the outside, 26.5 inch radius on the inside, 1.75% grade, 4 turns to level 2, from level 2 to 1, and 3 turns from level 3 to staging. Helix 2 is a single track, 22 inch radius, 2.5% grade, 3 turns level 3 to level 2. The layout height, level 1 is at 38 inch, level 2 is at 49 inch, and level 3 is at 58 inch. The construction is open grid framing with 1/2 inch plywood and 1/2 inch Homosote and cork road bed on the main lines only. The yards and whatnot are directly on the Homosote. For the most part, I use Atlas Code 100 Flex Track and Pico Code 100 Streamline switches. At the time, I had to decide between, code 83, code 100. A lot of that decision went to the fact that at the time I was building this, Pico didn't have a whole lot of selection in their code 83 switches. They have since filled out that line, but back then they didn't have it fully filled out. And based upon the experience I had, Pico switches were the way I wanted to go. And as far as what track I used, Atlas track was fine. I looked at Ken McCory's layout. He's got a beautiful layout. He uses Atlas track. My thinking was if it's good enough for Ken, it's good enough for me. So I use Atlas code 100 track. I use Digitrax DCC. I've got simplex and duplex radio capability. I've got a single command station for the entire railroad, 3 boosters for different areas, 9 power districts using the PSX power controls, and I've got 2 auto reverses for that purpose. Because my staging is double-ended, trains come in and out both directions. So the blocks leading to staging on either side are auto reversing blocks. You had to do that because of the nature of the beast there. I use car cards and waybills for my freight car routing. And I've got a CTC panel built using JMRI. It's a complete control of all mainline switches and signals. And communication is FRS radios between the train operators and the dispatcher, and telephones between the dispatcher and the yard master. All right, so let's talk a little about the operations. How much time do I have? Let's see. It's 3:28, so I'm done at 3:30. Is that correct? No, actually, I'm supposed to be done at 3:15.
Yeah, you're okay.
You sure? Doug, I don't
Yeah,
think you cut
already-
into your time.
I already confirmed with Doug. He's not on a time constraint, so we can run a little over.
Okay, okay. So the way I operate my railroad is I've got a sign-up board. And this came directly from the way Ken and McCory and Doug Clay operated their railroads. All right, you go up to the sign-up board, you take the next train, and you run that train. I thought that worked the best of all the different mechanisms that I had seen. So that's what I used on my railroad. So this is an early picture, early in my operating time frame. I've got more trains on that board now, and things have changed somewhat from the original operation. So the train crews go, they sign up, they talk to the dispatcher, get their permission to move. This was the original dispatcher's desk when I had the main line controlled using the CTC panel, and the staging, access to staging was that diode matrix that I had there. So it was all analog. I have since replaced that with the, like I said, with the stationary decoders. So this panel in the front is gone now. And the dispatcher's desk, this is basically what they look at to operate the railroad. They throw the switches like a regular CTC panel. You hit the lever here and you press the button. You hit the lever, you do this, you tell the switch left or right, you hit the button, it does the right thing out on the railroad. Okay, what I've used here is JMRI simple signal logic to operate my signals. And it's interesting, it's important how you pronounce that. It's not simple signal logic, it's simple signal logic. You can't get too complex with the JMRI simple signal logic. It's basics. It's really, it takes simple things and you can translate them and it works well. But there's other add-ons to JMRI if you want to get a little more complicated and complex. But that's what I used and it works well for me. I've replaced that diode matrix, as I mentioned earlier, with stationary decoders. Therefore, I was able to integrate that into the JMRI operation too. So basically the dispatcher clicks on one of these red buttons, it turns green, and that throws the switches leading into that particular track in staging. This is the 10-yard staging. On the west end, it's Federal Street. On the east end, it's Johnstown, as I mentioned earlier. My car card system is something developed by another gentleman I've gotten to know, Ray Fisher. Some of you may or may not know him. It's based upon actually everything is held in Excel spreadsheets, and the printouts are all on Microsoft Word documents, and he uses a mail merge type of facility to get the data from the Excel spreadsheets onto the Microsoft Word documents. But this is the end result. You've got a card for the your motive power or your consist. Okay, tells you whether it's sound or not, where to return the engine when, when done with it, et cetera, what your DCC address is. You've got a sound card in those, with those engines that have sound, telling you what functions deal with, do what. You've got a crew brief regarding the train you're running, where it starts, where the origin, the destination, instructions for the operator. And originally I had a train routing insert. I don't use those any longer. That's when I needed the train routing insert when every train went into staging, but now they don't. And I was able to eliminate that. Car cards, you've got a card for each car, and you've got a 4-sided waybill that you flip after every set, that I flip after every session, that gives the destination of where the car is headed for the next session. It's got a lot of information on it. Sometimes I think it's got too much information. Does the operator really need to know what the contents of this tank car are? Yeah, maybe, maybe not, right? Depends on how detailed you want to get. Each yard has a blocking chart for the trains that get built in the yard for, to help the yard master understand what gets built. The dispatcher has a sheet that he uses to kind of keep track of the trains, who's running them, when they're on duty, off duty, what they're doing, work locations, where they're coming from, where they're going, that sort of thing. Each yard master has a sheet that describes the trains that they're going to experience during that session, what that train does, where it's coming from, where it's going, etc. There's also instructions down the bottom. It got cut off on the slide, but it gives them instructions on particular things they need to get done. And then there's also a space there for special instructions, because invariably every session, when I stage a session, there's some special instructions as an exception to a rule that has to be taken into account. I use these car card boxes from Micromark. They're at each one of the yards and at the industries. There's kind of a picture of Kiski Yard with this is level 2. You can see level 1 down below it, level 3 above that. Okay, CP Higgins is the control point where you get into Etna Yard. I'm sorry, West Trenham Yard. Kiski Yard has an engine terminal too, which kind of is not exactly per the prototype, but I needed to have a place for engines there, so I built an engine yard there. And I've got a little space here on the front main line for to measure the speed that the trains are running. That's interesting to have during an operating session, but I use that primarily when I buy a new engine. Every engine on my railroad is speed matched. Maximum speed 60 miles an hour at speed step 28. Speed step 14, it's at 30 miles an hour. And speed step 7, it's at 15 miles an hour. So I can consist any engines I want at any point in time, because they're all speed matched the same. And I think that's important. It was important for me to be able to do that with my railroad. And there's a couple of friends of mine, Kiski Yard crew at work. You'll recognize Doug Watts there. He regularly does the Kiski Yard crew job, with Tony Rogowski being the yard master. This picture was taken quite a while ago. Things have changed a little bit on the railroad, not really that much. And this is the way we usually end the session, with a few beers before everybody goes home. And that's it. Thank you for your time. I hope that what I had to show you was a little interesting for you this afternoon.
Thank you, Bob. We've got a new resource for you. Commenting in our chat here is one of our members, Howard Smith, who was the Kiski Junction yard master in 1978.
Really?
Yeah.
Howard, we have to get together and talk.
I just sent Howard. I just sent Howard your email address. But Howard, I don't know if you want to pop in here and you have anything to add to what Bob was just talking about.
I unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I'd be glad to talk with Bob and send him my email, and I'll send him a bunch of stories that Ben got out of me. Ben Snyder dug out of me, and Kiski was a fun place to work. I when they sent me to Ashtabula from Kiski, I cried. I really didn't want to leave.
Yeah, I've met Ben Snyder. He, when we used to have November open houses, Ben came a couple of years in a row. And he was, he was very excited about it because he was telling me he wanted to build a model of the Conemaugh as well. So yeah, I'm sure Howard, he was very interested in what you had to tell him.
Well, I managed to clean out the basement. And he's got all my old railroad junk. So
Yeah.
his way, it's got Kiski written all over it.
Yeah,
Okay.
Ben is doing N scale, but basically almost the same area as you are.
Yeah.
He was just getting the bench work together as of a couple months ago, so he's a little further behind, but very, very much shared interest in the same thing. So
Yeah. He's not on today, is he?
Doug and I can tell you a
no,
story.
Ben.
after.
I actually texted Ben a little while ago. He said he's busy child rearing.
Yeah.
So
he actually, first time he met me, he called me Mr. Zeolla. I told him you got to stop that.
but yeah, so you can, because I just sent Howard your email address, Bob.
I sent Howard my email address as well.
Okay. Good.
Glad to tell you the story.
You guys can connect and hopefully get some information there. I'll
Great,
help you out.
great. Thanks.
So-
Thanks.
And that's what we do. Part of this is connecting people. So
Great.
thank you very much. And I think that brings us to Mr. Watts.
All right, let me see if I do this screen share right here. Let's see. All right, can everybody see that?
No.
All right, wait a minute.
You hit your screen share button there on the bottom of your Zoom window.
Okay. Yeah, all right, bear with me here real quick.
Yep.
When you hit that green button, it should show you a couple different windows there. You should be able to pick the one that's your PowerPoint presentation.
All right, wait a minute. All right, I've got the green arrow.
Mhm.
Oops. All right, tell me I can't do screen share while another participant is sharing.
Nope, you're in. You're good.
Man,
Yep, just pick your PowerPoint presentation. We're looking at your screen. Oh, it shouldn't have done that. I apologize. Hold on.
okay.
There you go. I'm sorry. I didn't realize it clicked it.
All right, we there now?
Thank you.
No, we're not.
What's going on here?
All right, I am off.
Hang on.
Okay.
Ask you the screen share. Where to do that?
You should be able to share your screen now, Doug. Carolyn, stop sharing hers.
Yeah.
All right, hold on a minute, folks.
Technology is great when it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we did the dry run here before and everything was fine. Trying to figure out what I'm not doing right here.
Whatever you clicked when it said you couldn't share your screen while she was sharing hers.
Yeah, do the same thing again. It's that green button.
Yeah, now I can't. All right, hold on here.
Hover down over the bottom. It should bring the green button up again.
Yeah, for some strange reason, I can see my presentation, but I can't see the.
Are you in presentation mode on your PowerPoint, Doug?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you
Get
might
out
have
of
to come
presentation.
out of presentation
That's gonna
mode.
cover
Hit
it.
escape. Bring it out of
All right.
presentation mode.
All right. Okay, so can you?
All right, so hover over your Zoom screen. You should see the green button pop up. It's the bottom of the Zoom screen.
Yep.
Hit the screen share button and then pick your PowerPoint screen. Wait, what am I- There we
There you
go. There we got it.
Hey,
All right.
Perfect.
Success.
Got it. Now you can go back to that presentation view we looked at before up at the top.
Yep.
Bingo.
All right,
Oh,
is everybody,
perfect. Sorry about that. I screwed that up in the middle.
not a problem. I see how you treat me here. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay, before we get into the presentation here real quick, wanted to say thanks to Rudy for his leadership and congratulations to Brock on moving into the presidency. Carolyn, thanks for your guidance on working with me on the marketing committee and events committee, and also thanks to John McLaughlin. And quick advertisement here for Q3 and Q4. We've got some interesting folks that have a lot of Conrail knowledge and experience that invitations are going out to see if they are going to be able to be our presenters. So stay tuned to that. Larry DeYoung, thanks for your great presentation and thanks for your friendship and mentorship when I worked for you at Conrail. Bob Zeolla, thanks for your presentation. Folks, as you saw from the photograph, I'm one of Bob's regular operators, and I give Bob a lot of credit because I've had the opportunity to operate on a lot of model railroads, and a lot of guys do not want to make changes. And Bob doesn't have a problem going in, evaluating what his operators say does and doesn't make sense, and he makes the changes, he makes it happen, and he keeps it fresh and fun. Like Bob said, there's some railroads that they're beautiful, but the operation is like, I don't think so. But I give Bob credit for that. And last, before the presentation, as a train master trainee, my first freight train ride was on the Conemaugh line. And being a smarty pants, I thought, man, I want to ride the main line. And so my assignment was supposed to be on TV2 out of East Conway. Well, that got changed as things do in operations, and ended up riding with another trainee on WICE6, a local out of East Conway. We had double-headed SD45 or SD40-2, 6512 and a 6367, 98 freight cars. We made 2 set outs at Etna and West Tarentum. We had a caboose, doubled back to the caboose, and then at a place at that time it was called Banks on the Conemaugh line, we picked up 80 100-ton hoppers of coal. I look back on that, and my retrospect on that is I am so glad that I had the opportunity to ride the Conemaugh line, because it was very interesting to see that operation. It was very interesting. It was double track at the time. So that's an early Conrail memory for me. And Bob, thanks a lot for helping me to remember that. So folks, my presentation today is not about the equipment. It's about the people. I've started off with this first document here, which is part of a 4-page weekly newswire that came out from Conrail, called the Conrail Newswire. And Bob Zeolla, you'll recognize this font because we've talked about that on the general orders and timetable information that you have for your railroad. But the reason I have this on here is because any late breaking news for Conrail was on here, and this came out to everybody that had email access. So on page 2, oh my goodness, when I got my promotion to become the director of the Operations Management Training Program, it was announced in this document. So I didn't know that was going to happen in advance. It was quite a surprise. I got phone calls, emails from other folks, a lot of congratulations. It was pretty interesting. Wanted to show you the rest of this because there was also safety information in there, and you can see in the middle of the page, it talked about the different divisions and what their safety records look like year over year. I, Howard Smith, will remember this. These were things that were important, and there was a lot of different measurements. And then last but not least, wanted to talk about, there was the stock price as of September 22nd, 1980 or 1995, sorry. So the Operations Management Training Program, and you look at the lower left section there and you'll see June 7th, 1996. Yes, sir, folks, this is the same presentation that I made. This is only the second time this has been done. And the first audience was Mr. Ron Conway, was our Senior Vice President of Operations, and I had the opportunity to be a direct report to him. This presentation was to Mr. Conway and his staff. So I'll put it in perspective. I was a director, that was a pretty good position to get to at Conrail. But everybody else on Mr. Conway's staff, they were either assistant vice presidents, full vice presidents, or the senior vice president, Mr. Conway. We all know about goals and objectives and measurements and key performance indicators. One of the things that Mr. Conway had looked at was succession planning. And as he said to me one day, he said, I have a strong bench as far as my starters, but I'm looking at down the road, what does that look like when folks who are my starters have an opportunity to move to another opportunity to move to another position? Who is behind them that we can move forward? So it takes us to what our program mission was going to be. And I'm not going to read these, but I'll let you folks read it, but I'll comment on these. And so when you first look at that, you go, well, that's corporate speak. Well, yes and no. What Mr. Conway wanted to do was he wanted to have a program that's similar to what I went through in the Trainmasters training program, which was almost a 6-month training class and combined with OJT and field operations. The purpose of the program I went through was to have Trainmasters that could eventually rise up to the level of division superintendents, general managers. Mr. Conway was looking at the program to take folks and move them through the operating department and other departments so that they could become members of senior management. So this was exciting for me. It was very exciting because as I identify myself, I'm a transportation dog. I can tell you how to get the train safely and efficiently from A to B and intermediate points if there are. But as far as getting into something totally new and way, way out of my comfort zone, it was an opportunity to do something that hadn't been done. And as Mr. Conway and I talked about it during the interview process, he says, basically, you're going to start with a clean sheet of paper. So I said, yeah, that's pretty interesting. He said, yeah, it is. He said, it has its challenges. And indeed it did. So what I did was I worked with our human resources department, real good partnership with those folks. And I thought, okay, well, there's been programs in the past. So fortunately for me, we still had folks at Conrail at the time that had gone through predecessor programs, New York Central, Penn Central, and then even folks that had gone through some Conrail programs, including myself. But I wanted to do something different here. So we also looked at what were other companies offering their management trainees. So we did benchmarking internally and externally. And a really interesting and very helpful partner was the SmithKline Beecham company at the time. I had open access to work with their HR folks, learn about the things that they were doing. And of course, they were looking at things on an international perspective. So that gave me ideas on some things that may or may not work for Conrail. And of course, my key people internally were Mr. Conway, Senior VP, VPs on his staff, and then general managers in the field, because I needed to determine what the operating department's needs were. And at the end of the day, the operating department was my main customer. We looked at some initial requirements. We wanted to make sure that there was appropriate introductions to Conrail, because the vision here was to have a training class that was made up of folks that were internal candidates, as well as folks that were hired from other industries. So they came in off the street. Formal classroom training, a necessary component. We wanted to make sure that there was a structure for the associates while they were in the field, because the very good training program I went through as a Trainmaster trainee was very well done. But one of the things that I would have done differently is to make sure that there was more structure, not meaning that somebody's micromanaging you as a trainee, but that you don't feel disconnected. And there were some times that I felt disconnected when I was going through the training process, not so much classroom, but when I was out in the field. We want to make sure that there's always an ongoing evaluation process, because we wanted this to be relevant and current right up to the moment. So keys, partnership with the operating department, critical partners, and those were some of the folks that you saw on the last slide. We wanted advanced planning with those folks so that we could set up meaningful rotational assignments. Definitely a key, bullet 3, mentoring and coaching. Again, that goes back to making sure that folks going through the program didn't feel like they were on their own and they had to make it up as they went along. And then a key selling point internally was to link the program to operating department values and the corporate values. So at that time, Conrail had a program called Horizons, which had a lot to do with goals and objectives and key performance indicators. So again, you design a program. I could design it if it's designed in a vacuum and it looks really great, and then I roll it out and everybody goes, well, it looks pretty, but it doesn't do anything. Then I failed in my mission. So I wanted to make sure, and this is where the partnership with human resources came in, to make sure that the program was tied into what was making sense for how people were being evaluated, and we could tweak that as necessary. So at that particular time, the Horizons process was under reevaluation. So part of what we were doing here as far as those dimensions, we kind of backburnered that for a little bit, but we always kept an eye on what was going on as far as the Horizons program reevaluation so that we could revisit it at the appropriate time. The program I went through was 6 months. I sold this as a 1.5-year program. The reason being is I wanted to make sure that the trainees felt that they weren't being rushed, that they had an opportunity to really see Conrail, not just the operating department, but other departments as well, to see how the operating department and the other departments work together, or at times when there were silo goals, we didn't work together. But over time, we learned how to take those silos down and get integrated in how we did things and to work together. So like we said, 8 months classroom and out on the divisions, and then 10 months with the operating units, which were at corporate. As the operations management training program director, I was a mentor, and the other key contacts were also coaching and mentoring partners. The senior VP, his vice presidents, and then general managers. Classroom time at 2 Commerce Square, which was headquarters at that time at 19th and Market Street. One of the things I wanted to make sure is that we had ongoing evaluation of the courses. And one of the VPs, well, he was an AVP, excuse me, after the presentation, we talked about it, and he said having these semi-monthly evaluations was good. He said, not that you're always trying to change things, but you want to make sure that everything is relevant. Now, of course, we're in 2021 now, so take this back to 1996 and think about what companies were doing at that time. Evaluation forms for each course, or as somebody told me once upon a time, they called these smile sheets, because it's like, oh, well, yeah, everything was great with this course. Well, no, I didn't want people to tell me that everything was great with it. If it wasn't good, you know, what wasn't good about it, I don't want you to just tell me that it was bad, but give me the reasons why. And then if you could change it, what should we do? Then, of course, overall evaluation upon completion of that phase, so that I always wanted the trainees to feel that they had a hand in making sure that they knew where they were and then where they wanted to be. In the classroom components, the courses had to cover a wide variety of issues and development, because what we were looking at was folks that would be operating department management and senior management, but not just focused on how we move the trains, which of course is a key component, and everybody knows that. But they needed to understand other things so that they were business savvy and operating department savvy, so that they could step into other roles as far as cross training, or make sure that their operating departments or their operating units were being run tightly and efficiently. So some of the courses, business ethics, team management, financial analysis, you look at that and go, well, financial analysis. And I said, yeah, there's a lot of things. When I was a train master, I wished I'd have had some courses of financial analysis, because it definitely would have helped with some decisions. All of those topics were the result, again, of going back to my main customer, who was the operating department, Mr. Conway and his staff. Going out into the operating units, the trainees would be assigned at the highest level. They'd be assigned to the unit vice president. Wanted them to have an understanding of what each role was within Conrail, and then the interaction. And then a key item that I didn't have in training, but we made up for it with some other things, is to have either an individual project or a team project that the trainees would work on, so that they could see an opportunity within a unit and say, well, hey, here's something that we as the unit haven't been able to get to. We've got some trainees here, maybe they can work with us. And this would help give these folks a sense of ownership. When the time was done for their assignment in the operating units, then there was an exit interview and evaluation, so that the trainee knew, what he or she, where their strengths were, where there was areas for continuous improvement, and then also to talk about their feedback to the unit VP to understand some of the things that were going on within the operating unit. So you can see one of the consistent themes here is ongoing communication. The division tours, again, assigned to the highest level, which was the general manager. And I wanted the trainees to spend time, because working for the railroad, you got to see it. You have to be out there. You have to have an appreciation for it and see what the crews are up against, the train masters, yard masters, division, general managers, superintendents, etc. See what's going on a division, and then get an appreciation for the differences in the divisions. That was an opportunity that I had before I got my train master's assignment. I was in the service control and transportation analysis department. And that gave me an opportunity to be part of a division inspection team that went out and did division audits. It gave me an appreciation for the differences in the divisions. On the New Jersey division at the time, that was a terminal intensive division. You go out on the Allegheny division, there was some terminal traffic there, but a lot of that was bridge traffic. So there's differences in the divisions, and wanted the trainees to understand the differences and then how those divisions interacted with one another. On the ground time, very important, a key component. You've got to spend time with the trains, get out, ride with the crews. Just like I said, I thought I knew everything and wanted to ride a trail van train. Well, I got the opportunity to ride a local, and it was a real eye opener. Again, another theme there, the team or individual projects, and then the exit interview and evaluation, and wrapping up your time on each division. After going through this, your assignment would be to a first line management position once you completed the program. Each trainee had an individual action plan. There was going to be ongoing progress measurement. Another key component, the ability to network. And that was one of the things that I didn't realize it when I went through the Train Masters training program, but I realized it after the fact. Networks were starting to be put in place as I went through that program, because I got to see a lot of the railroad as a trainee, and got to see a lot of railroad on the division inspection team. Of course, it was a different focus then, but there's people that I met and our paths crossed and recrossed during the time I was with Conrail, because I was with Conrail from September of '85 right up until the end, May 31st of 1999. And I can't tell you how many people helped me throughout that time. And these are people that I met through the Train Masters training program. So I wanted the trainees to be able to build their networks and not just take away from the network, but contribute to the network. We also want to do an evaluation of the trainees' interest to see where their strong suits were, and do they have a vision on, hey, I think I'd like to work in this, or I'd like to be in mechanical, or I'd like to be in engineering, eventually maybe marketing, etc. So the status as of when this presentation was made, June 7th, is we were getting ready to, the program was designed, we were getting ready for recruitment. In fall of '96, we start the recruitment for first quarter of '97, and partner with HR for the development of a structured interview, review of the campus circuit, recruiting materials, etc. important item here in the review of the campus circuit is, and it's sort of like taking a headline from, or a story from today's headlines, is Conrail is looking at things differently. And as a corporation, yeah, Conrail had things that could always be improved upon. But one of the things that I saw as an African-American member of Conrail's management team is that Conrail was looking at diversity. And one of the items that we looked at in the review of the campus circuit was, where do we usually go when we were doing our recruiting? Well, if you're doing engineering, you're looking at engineering schools. If you're looking at commercial, you're looking at other schools. Did we go to historically Black colleges and universities? A little bit, but not a lot. And so that was being built into this, because one of the things that Mr. Conway talked with me about was he wanted this to be diverse. He wanted to be as broad brush as possible, because again, he was looking for future leaders within the operating department and then possibly within other departments at Conrail. Well, again, status. Yeah, well, we all know what happened in the fall of '96, the quote unquote merger of equals. And so this program, as well structured as it was, and we were ready to roll it out, we never got to roll it out. So what we looked at was, if we had been able to roll it out, it would be used as a succession planning tool within the operating department. And then what we wanted to do is we wanted to be at the head of the class for all of Conrail and say, well, hey, here's a succession planning model that could be used for other departments as they looked at their starters and said, got a strong starters here, but my bench is a little soft. And here's some things that I think that I need to do. So that's the end of the formal presentation, but I want to tell you that it was quite an experience to have the opportunity to do that. And one of the things that it showed me, folks, amongst many things, is going from a train master to being a direct report to the senior vice president of operations was like, any meeting I went to, people go, what do you need? And it's like, because they knew that I was there, and my mission was, working for Mr. Conway. And I will say this, Mr. Conway was a great boss. Larry DeYoung talked about earlier, higher level management folks sometimes, get the bad name and all this kind of good stuff. Mr. Conway is a great boss. I met with him. I think we had regular meetings. If it wasn't weekly, it was every other week. And I gave him my status report. And I have to share this story. I make sure that my presentations were tight, because you had a certain block of time to go in, meet with him, present, answer questions, talk about next steps, and then, head out the door. And the first time I did that, as I turned and he said, okay, we'll see you next week. I said, thank you, sir. I was walking out and I happened to turn as I was going out the door, and he had my presentation and he was putting it in the trash can. And so I thought about that, and I went back down and I talked with somebody else about it, and they said, hey, you nailed it. He doesn't have the time to have a whole bunch of papers sitting around. He was relying on his folks to get certain things done. He's relying on you to get this done. So don't feel bad about that. So you've got the time with him either every week or every other week. You're keeping him up to date. He's giving you additional questions and another mission. So you're good to go. So that was an early learning experience, and really helped me a lot. So like I said, that's the end of the formal part of this. I mean, we'll open this up if we've got time. People, if you have questions, anything you want to ask me, stage is wide open.
I guess you're really thorough, Doug.
Yeah, I guess. Either that or everybody fell asleep.
Hey, Doug, this is John.
Yes, sir.
What was the one issue that Mr. Conway was most concerned about when it came to recruiting people?
He wanted us to be thorough in our selection process, John, and he wanted to make sure that the folks that we recruited had the interest in transportation and understood what they were getting into, because his thought was, if we're going to make the investment in these folks, we want to make sure that they're going to be with us And we want to make sure that they have the interest and understand what it is that we're trying to do.
Good.
Well, not seeing anybody else with questions or anything popping up in chat here. So thank you very much, Doug. And I look forward to seeing some more of your stuff in the future. And you've got all kinds of
Great job,
experience
Doug.
you can share with us.
Okay.
One final thing, I think Jose is still on here somewhere. Jose did want to say something about FlexiFlow. Jose, it's all you.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet all of you, see all of you, I guess. It's a working meeting for me, so I'm at work. I'm not at the museum right now. But thank you all for helping save the FlexiFlow and getting it to Danbury. We took a look at it, and it's got some issues, but as soon as we get the turntable fixed, we're gonna want to move it onto our one of the radio leads there, and we'll get some guys on it to seal up some of the holes on the outside. There's a pretty big hole on the car, and also seal up the top hatches. I don't know if you've seen pictures of
I
the
showed them
car.
earlier.
Yeah, but 3 top hatches, 2 of them are gone and replaced with covers. The one cover that's there has a hole in it. And then there's a pretty good sized hole on the side of the car. And we want to get those all sealed up to keep water from getting into the car more than it already has. The water does drain out of it, though. It did have a runny nose the other day out of one of the hoppers on the bottom there. But thank you all for helping preserve that car, and we'll start working on it as soon as we can, hopefully.
Cool. Absolutely. And it's been a great pleasure to work with you guys up there in Danbury, and be able to kind of pull off something pretty spectacular for as far as preservation and getting that car shipped to you
Yeah.
guys was a fun project. So
Yeah, we're hopefully going to be open again in summer. So if any of you want to stop by and see us, we'll be open. I think the only name other than Rudy I recognize is Tony White. I don't know if you remember me, but
yeah, highly recommended. I was up there when the FlexiFlow came in a couple weeks ago, and the museum is unwittingly a giant Conrail museum, because almost everything they've got sitting in the yard there is some kind of Conrail piece of equipment, one way or the other, including a pretty good collection of various Conrail or Conrail predecessor freight cars. Reading Boxcar, a Penske 70-ton hopper, there's a Penske X58 up there. There's 2 different Conrail cabooses, actually 3 technically Conrail cabooses there. Bunch of different stuff. So this is the Danbury Railway Museum in Danbury, Connecticut, and you can learn more about them at danburyrail.org. The FlexiFlow is now listed on the website as well. So I think that's it, guys. Anyone else has anything else they want to say? But
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Nice work.
all right. Well, our next meeting will be on July 17th. It will be virtual again, as was this one. So I guess we'll see you in July. Thanks everybody for coming.
Nice job, Rudy. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Take care, folks.
Be safe.
Well.